Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're going to take a long, quiet journey to a place that is, in many ways, the very definition of emptiness. A place so vast and so demanding that it didn't just shape a people, it forged them. We're heading to the Eurasian Steppe, the sprawling, seemingly endless sea of grass that served as the crucible for one of history's most formidable forces, the Mongols. But before we get to the legendary Horde, we first have to understand their home, because to understand the steppe is to understand the incredible resilience, the sheer grit, and the almost supernatural ingenuity required just to wake up in the morning. It's a story of survival on a scale that's difficult for us, in our world of central heating and grocery delivery, to truly comprehend. Now, as always, before we dive in, a quick bit of housekeeping. If you enjoy what I do here, if this little corner of the internet helps you quiet your mind and drift off, I'd be so grateful if you'd consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. It's a small thing, but it genuinely helps. And if you feel so inclined, leave a comment, letting me know where in the world you're listening from tonight. It's always fascinating to see this quiet community of ours, all settling down for the night, spread out across the globe. Alright, that's enough of that. Now is the time to let the day go. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Maybe find that perfect spot on your pillow. Let your shoulders relax. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. And let's ease into our journey together. Back to a time and a place where the sky was everything, and the earth was a constant, unforgiving test. Chapter 1. The Crucible. Life on the Endless Steppe. The word steppe itself sounds quiet, doesn't it? It has a soft, sweeping sound to it. And in a way, that's accurate. For much of the year, the dominant sound on the great Eurasian steppe would have been the wind, a constant sighing, whispering, and sometimes screaming presence. It was the soundtrack to life. This wind blew across an expanse of land so enormous it's difficult to hold in your mind. Imagine a place that stretches from Hungary in the west, all the way across Ukraine, through Russia, Kazakhstan, and into Mongolia and Manchuria in the east. It's not a single, uniform thing. It's a collection of plains, grasslands, and semi-deserts that together form a highway of history. For millennia, this was the world's great thoroughfare for migrating peoples, armies, and ideas. But it was a highway with a brutally high toll. The first thing you have to understand about the steppe is that it is a landscape of extremes. It's not a gentle pastoral meadow from a storybook. It's a place that is actively, almost personally, trying to kill you. It does this primarily through its climate, which can only be described as bipolar. The summers are scorching. We're talking temperatures well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or 40 degrees Celsius. The sun is relentless, beating down from a sky that feels impossibly huge and empty, because there is nothing to break the horizon. No mountains to speak of, and most importantly, almost no trees. Forget finding a shady oak to rest under. The only shade you might find is the shadow cast by your own horse. The ground bakes and cracks, the air shimmers with heat. Dust gets into everything, your clothes, your food, your lungs. It's a dry, suffocating heat that leaches the moisture out of everything. And then comes the winter. The winter on the steppe is not our winter. It is not the inconvenience of a snow day, or the romance of a white Christmas. It is a monolithic, terrifying force. An antagonist in the story of your life. Temperatures plummet to extremes that are frankly absurd. We're talking -40, 50, even -60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a temperature so cold that it's the same in both Fahrenheit and Celsius. It's a cold that doesn't just make you shiver. It feels like a physical weight, a presence. It freezes rivers solid, turning them into icy roads. It freezes the very moisture in your breath into tiny crystals that hang in the air. The wind, that same wind from the summer, now becomes a razor filled with ice and snow, capable of flaying any exposed skin in minutes. If you've ever complained about a draft in your apartment, the steppe nomads would like a word. Their homes, the iconic felt tents we call askers, or askyurts asterisk, were marvels of engineering, but they were still, at the end of the day, structures made of wood lattice and layers of wool felt, standing against a cold that could shatter steel. The battle against the cold was not a matter of comfort. It was a constant, desperate war for survival. The main goal was simply not to wake up as a permanent part of the room's ice sculpture collection. This vicious swing between blistering heat and life-extinguishing cold created a very specific set of rules for life. You couldn't be a farmer in the way we think of it. The growing season was brutally short, and the rainfall was unreliable at best. You couldn't just plant your seeds in May and hope for a bountiful harvest in September. A sudden drought in July could wither your entire crop to dust. An early frost in August could kill it on the vine. The steppe simply did not reward sedentary life. It punished it. If you tried to build a permanent village, you would quickly find yourself in a fatal bind. The pasture your animals grazed on in the spring would be barren by summer. The single water source you relied upon might dry up completely or freeze solid in winter. Staying in one place was a death sentence. And so the steppe gave birth to its most famous adaptation, nomadism. But for the people of the steppe, it wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was a non-negotiable term of their survival contract with the land. They didn't wander aimlessly. Their movements were a precise, calculated science, a ballet of survival passed down through countless generations. They followed the grass. The grass was everything. It was the fuel that powered their entire civilization. It fed the sheep, which gave them meat, milk, and wool. It fed the goats, which gave them cashmere and more meat. It fed the cattle and yaks, which served as beasts of burden. And most importantly, it fed the horses. The horse was the soul of the steppe nomad. It was their transportation, their weapon of war, their status symbol, and, in a pinch, their emergency food supply. A man's wealth was not measured in gold or land because you couldn't own the land. It was measured in the number and quality of the animals he possessed. And all of those animals, the entire mobile economy, depended entirely on finding enough grass to eat. So they moved. They had their summer pastures, usually in the north or at higher elevations where it was cooler and the grass was lusher. And they had their winter pastures, typically in more sheltered valleys or areas where the wind might blow the snow clear, exposing the cured frozen grass underneath. They knew the land with an intimacy we can't imagine. They didn't have GPS or Google Maps. They had the stars, the shape of the hills, the direction of the prevailing wind, the memory of their ancestors. They could read the landscape like a book, knowing where a hidden spring might be found, or which valley offered the best protection from a winter storm. This constant movement meant that everything they owned had to be portable. This is where the asterisk and an asterisk comes in. It's a masterpiece of nomadic design, a circular lattice of wood that could be expanded for setup and collapsed for transport. A central crown ring held the roof poles in place, with an opening to let out smoke from the central fire. This entire wooden skeleton was then covered in layers of felt, which is essentially compacted sheep's wool. Felt is a brilliant material. It's relatively lightweight, it's a fantastic insulator against both cold and heat, and it's water-resistant. In the winter they would pile on extra layers of felt, sometimes packing snow around the base of the aspgerlarts to act as an extra layer of insulation against the wind. The door always faced south, away from the brutal prevailing northern winds. The inside of a aspgerlar, Ask was a single circular room, a microcosm of their entire world. It was the kitchen, the bedroom, the living room, and the nursery, all centered around the hearth. The fire was the beating heart of the home. It provided warmth, light, and the means to cook. But fuel was one of the steppe's great scarcities. Remember, there are very few trees. You couldn't just go out into the woods and chop down firewood for the winter. Wood was a precious, almost sacred commodity, used for the frame of the asterisk ger, asterisk for saddles for bows. You didn't burn it frivolously. So, what did they burn? The answer is as practical as it is to our modern sensibilities, a bit unsavoury. They burned dung, the dried droppings of their own livestock. It was the ultimate renewable resource. All summer long, families, especially children, would be tasked with collecting the droppings of the herds. They would be shaped into flat cakes and left to dry in the relentless sun until they were as hard and dry as bricks. This was their firewood, their asterisk argol asterisk. It burned surprisingly well, with a slow, smouldering heat and a characteristically pungent, earthy smoke. That smell, the smell of burning dung, would have been the scent of home, the scent of warmth and survival. It was the perfume of the steppe. Life was a constant cycle of preparation. Summer was not a time for vacation. It was a race against time to prepare for winter. While the animals grew fat on the summer grasses, the people were busy. Women would spend months milking the mares, sheep and goats, and then churning and fermenting that milk into a vast array of products that could be preserved. Milk was their staple. They drank it fresh, but more often it was processed. They made yogurt, cheeses that were dried until they were as hard as stones, and their most famous beverage, chark, fermented mare's milk. It's a slightly alcoholic, effervescent, sour drink that is an acquired taste, to put it mildly. But it was packed with vitamins and probiotics, a vital source of nutrition in a diet that was often desperately low on fresh vegetables. Every part of the animal was used. The meat would be cut into thin strips and dried in the wind and sun, creating a kind of jerky that could last through the long winter months. Nothing was wasted. Blood was used for sausages. Organs were eaten immediately. Even the bones were boiled down for broth, or carved into tools and ornaments. The scarcity of resources bred an incredible level of resourcefulness. You couldn't just pop to the store if something broke. If a part of your cart snapped, you had to know how to fix it with sinew and leather. If your boot developed a hole, you had to be able to patch it. Children learnt these skills from the moment they could walk. A boy would be on a horse almost as soon as he could sit up, learning to hunt, to track, to manage the herds. A girl would learn the complex arts of milking, processing food, making felt, sewing clothes, and managing the Gerstar. There was no room for specialization in the modern sense. Everyone had to be a generalist in the art of staying alive. But even with all this preparation, all this knowledge, the steppe always held the trump card. It had a secret weapon, a terror that was whispered about in folklore, and experienced with devastating regularity. It was called the Derd. The dude. Asterisk is not just a bad winter, it is a specific, compound natural disaster. There are different kinds. A white dude is a winter with so much snow that the animals simply cannot dig through it to reach the frozen grass beneath. They starve to death in their millions, surrounded by food they cannot access. A black dude is a winter with too little snow. It's just brutal, unrelenting cold and wind without the insulating blanket of snow to protect the ground and the animals. The herds freeze to death, but the worst, the most feared, is the iron day Udes This happens when a period of warmth, a brief thaw in the middle of winter, is followed by a sudden brutal snap of cold. The melting snow or rain freezes into a thick, impenetrable sheet of ice over the entire landscape. The grass is sealed away as if under a pane of glass. For the nomads, this was the apocalypse. Imagine watching your entire life's work, your entire net worth, your family's entire food supply for the coming year, starving to death right in front of your eyes, and being utterly powerless to stop it. The horses, with their sharp hooves, might be able to break through thin ice, but against a thick sheet they are helpless. The sheep and goats stand no chance. The sound would be of 1,000,000 desperate, starving animals, their cries growing weaker in the freezing air. A single Zod could wipe out a family, a clan, an entire tribe. It could reduce a wealthy man with thousands of animals to a beggar in a single season. It was the great equalizer of the steppe. It didn't care how skilled you were as a horseman, or how many sons you had. It was a roll of the cosmic dice, a brutal reminder that the land was always in charge. This constant looming threat of annihilation had a profound psychological effect. It fostered a deep-seated belief in the power of the natural world and the spirit world. The sky, Tengriast, the eternal blue sky, was their chief deity. It was the sky that brought the sun, the rain, and the snow. It was vast, powerful, and indifferent. Shamans would act as intermediaries, trying to placate the spirits of the mountains, the rivers, and the wind to ensure good fortune and stave off disaster. It also fostered a culture of extreme hospitality and communal support, balanced with ruthless pragmatism. If a traveller came to your you were expected to give them food and shelter, no questions asked, because next year, after the you could be the one who was the traveller, the one with nothing. Kinship was everything. Your family, Your clan, that was your social security network, your insurance policy against the caprice of the steppe. Loyalty within the group was paramount. But this harsh reality also bred a certain callousness. Life was fragile. Death was a constant companion. A weak animal in the herd would be cold without sentiment, because it was a drain on precious resources. There was no room for weakness in animals or in people. A tribe struggling for scarce winter pasture would not hesitate to fight, and fight brutally to secure it for themselves. The steppe was a zero-sum game. Another clan's gain was often your loss. This constant, low-level competition for resources, water, pasture, and livestock kept the steppe tribes in a perpetual state of raiding and warfare. This is the world that existed for centuries before the name Genghis Khan was ever uttered. It was a world of scattered, warring tribes, all playing the same brutal game of survival against the land and against each other. It was a relentless filtering mechanism. Generation after generation, it weeded out the unprepared, the unlucky, the slow. What it selected for was a very specific set of traits. It selected for mobility, the ability to pack up your entire existence and move hundreds of miles at a moment's notice was not a skill, it was an instinct. It selected for toughness, a people who could endure scorching heat and unimaginable cold, who could live for weeks on a diet of dried milk curds and jerky, who saw hardship not as an event, but as the very texture of life. It selected for tactical genius. Every hunt was a lesson in strategy, in flanking maneuvers, in understanding terrain. The annual cycle of nomadic movement was a massive logistical exercise, coordinating thousands of people and tens of thousands of animals across a vast landscape. And it selected for supreme horsemanship. A Mongol warrior was said to be more comfortable on the back of a horse than on his own 2 feet. They learned to ride as toddlers, and by the time they were men, they could fire a bow with deadly accuracy at a full gallop, twisting in the saddle to shoot backwards at a pursuing enemy. The famous Parthian shot. Their horses were as tough as they were, small, shaggy, and possessed of incredible stamina. They could survive on frozen grass and paw through snow, and their riders could live for days on the milk, and if necessary, the blood drawn from a small cut in the horse's neck. The steppe, in its infinite cruelty, was the perfect training ground. It was a military academy disguised as a homeland. It took scattered, disparate peoples and subjected them to the same brutal set of pressures for 1,000 years. It gave them the same skills, the same mindset, the same resilience. All that was missing was a single, unifying force, a leader with the vision and the will to take all of that latent potential, all of that toughness, mobility, and pent-up aggression, and point it in one direction. Before we move on to the rise of that leader, it's worth just sitting with this landscape for a moment longer. Try to picture it. Stand in the middle of that sea of grass. In the summer, the horizon is a clean, sharp line in every direction. The sky is a vast blue dome that presses down on you. The grass ripples in the wind like water. The silence is profound, broken only by that wind, the buzz of insects, the distant cry of a hawk. You feel small, exposed, insignificant. Now, picture it in winter. The world is white, a flat, endless expanse of white under a pale grey sky. The air is so cold it hurts to breathe. The silence is even deeper now, muffled by the snow. The only sound is the crunch of your own feet and the whistle of that wind which now feels like a malevolent entity, actively seeking you out, trying to find any gap in your clothing, any moment of inattention. Your world has shrunk to the tiny smoky circle of warmth inside your asterisk. Outside is not just a place, it's a form of death, waiting patiently. Living in that world, year after year, generation after generation, changes you. It burns away everything that is non-essential. It leaves you with a core of hardened practicality. It teaches you that the world is not a safe or predictable place. It teaches you to seize opportunities when they arise, with decisive and often brutal speed, because you may not get a second chance. The steppe was the ultimate teacher of ruthless efficiency, and it was from this crucible, this unforgiving, beautiful, and terrifying expanse of grass and sky, that the people who would conquer the known world would emerge, not as invaders from a foreign land, but as a direct product of the land itself. They were, in a very real sense, the human embodiment of the steppe. resilient, patient, capable of incredible endurance, and when roused, as unstoppable and destructive as a winter storm. They were its children, and they were about to inherit the world. And it was from this crucible, this unforgiving, beautiful, and terrifying expanse of grass and sky, that the people who would conquer the known world would emerge, not as invaders from a foreign land, but as a direct product of the land itself. They were, in a very real sense, the human embodiment of the steppe, resilient, patient, capable of incredible endurance, and when roused, as unstoppable and destructive as a winter storm. They were its children, and they were about to inherit the world. But being a child of the steppe wasn't some poetic abstraction. It was a full-time job with no holidays, no sick leave, and a very, very specific set of job requirements. It was a life of constant motion, a relentless cycle of calculation and survival that operated on a scale almost impossible for us to comprehend. Before they could ever dream of conquering empires, they first had to conquer the mundane, yet monumental challenge of Tuesday and Wednesday, and every single day that followed. Their empire wasn't built on iron and stone to begin with. It was built on grass, milk, and the quiet, profound genius of knowing exactly where to be and when. Chapter 2. The Nomadic Engine, Sustenance and Mobility. This is the story of the engine that powered the Horde, not the engine of war, not yet. This was the nomadic engine, the intricate living machine of sustenance and mobility that made everything else possible. It was a masterpiece of logistics, biology, and architecture, all humming along in near-perfect harmony with the seasons. And at the very heart of this engine, its pistons and its fuel, were the animals. In the modern world, we tend to think of wealth in terms of numbers in a bank account, stocks or real estate. For a Mongol, wealth was warm, it was breathing, it had 4 legs and a heartbeat. Their entire economy, their social standing, their diet, their clothing, and their ability to simply exist was wrapped up in their herds. This wasn't just a collection of livestock, it was a carefully balanced portfolio of walking, bleating, neighing assets, known collectively and rather charmingly as the 5 snouts or Asktabun Koshu Mal asterisk. Each snout played a unique and irreplaceable role in the grand symphony of survival. Getting the balance right was the difference between a prosperous clan and a collection of frozen bodies waiting for the spring thaw. Let's begin with the undisputed king, the aristocrat of the steppe, the animal that was more partner than property, the horse. It's impossible to overstate the importance of the horse to the Mongols. It was their legs, their weapon, their status symbol, and in many ways, their soul. Our relationship with a car is the closest, palest modern analogy we have, and even that falls laughably short. You don't have a deep spiritual connection to your Honda Civic. You don't compose epic poems about its glorious fenders. A Mongol's bond with their horse was something else entirely. These were not the towering, elegant thoroughbreds you might picture. The Mongol horse, the *taki*, was a small, stocky, and famously hardy creature, with a shaggy coat, a big head, and a temperament that was often described as stubborn and cantankerous. It was, like the Mongols themselves, perfectly adapted to its environment. It was a 4-legged survivalist. It could endure temperatures that would shatter the will of lesser beasts, from 40 below zero in the winter to over 100 degrees in the summer, and most crucially, it could find its own food, while the prized warhorses of European knights needed to be fed on carefully rationed grain. The Mongol horse could fend for itself, using its hooves to break through ice and snow in a technique called cratering to find the frozen grass beneath. This one simple skill was a profound strategic advantage. An army that carries its own fuel is limited. An army whose fuel is the very ground it walks on is, in theory, limitless. Every Mongol, man, woman and child, was an expert rider from the moment they could walk. It was said that a Mongol child was tied to a goat to learn balance before they were even old enough for a horse. By the age of 3 they were riding. By the age of 6 or 7 they were participating in the hunts. Armed with a small bow, becoming one with their mount, they could ride for days on end, sleeping in the saddle, firing arrows with lethal accuracy in any direction. The horse was an extension of their body. Their command over the animal was so complete that it mystified and terrified their enemies. to a European knight encased in 100 pounds of steel and perched precariously atop a massive charger. The sight of a Mongol warrior leaning down at a full gallop to pick something off the ground, or turning backward to fire a volley of arrows, was like witnessing some form of dark magic. But the horse was so much more than a vehicle for war. It was the centerpiece of the Mongol diet. This is where our modern sensibilities might begin to feel a little tested. The primary product, besides mobility, was milk, mare's milk. Throughout the summer, the mares were milked several times a day. This milk, lower in fat but higher in sugar than cow's milk, wasn't typically consumed fresh. Instead, it was poured into a large leather bag, a kukua, that was hung near the entrance of the home. Anyone who entered or left the Gerd was expected to give the bag a few punches or kicks as they passed. This constant churning, combined with the work of specific bacterial cultures, turned the milk into the national drink of Mongolia, airage, air, or kumsi, as it's known in other parts of Central Asia, is a mildly alcoholic, effervescent, fermented mare's milk. Its taste is famously difficult to describe to an outsider. It's sour, tangy, slightly fizzy, with a yeasty, almost smoky flavour. For us, it would be an acquired taste, to put it politely. For the Mongols, it was everything. It was a food, a drink, and a vital source of vitamins and minerals, in a diet that was otherwise severely lacking in fruits and vegetables. It was a social lubricant, a ritual beverage, and a symbol of hospitality. To be offered a bowl of air was an honour, and to refuse it was a grave insult. The alcohol content was relatively low, comparable to a light beer, but when it's your main source of hydration and you're drinking it all day long, it certainly contributed to a general state of well-being. And yes, when times were tough, or when a horse was old or injured, it was eaten. This was not done lightly. There was a deep-seated reverence for the animal, but survival on the steppe was a religion of pragmatism. The meat would be consumed, the hide used for leather, the sinews for bowstrings, even the bones for tools and ornaments. Nothing was wasted. This philosophy of total utilization applied to all their animals, but it was with the horse that the bond was most profound. It was a partnership that ended, when it had to, with one partner consuming the other to continue the cycle of life. It's a concept that feels alien to us, but it was the fundamental truth of their world. Now, if the horse was the aristocrat, the symbol of speed and conquest, then the humble sheep was the bedrock of the entire nomadic society. It was the second, and arguably most vital, of the 5 snouts. Sheep were the walking equivalent of a supermarket, a hardware store, and a power plant, all rolled into one. They were slower, less glamorous, but without them, the Mongol way of life would have simply collapsed. They were a source of meat, first and foremost. Mutton was the staple protein. The Mongols had a particular fondness for the fat, especially the tail fat from certain breeds of sheep, which could grow to enormous sizes. This fat was a high-energy food source, essential for surviving the brutal winters. It was eaten, rendered into tallow for lamps, and used as a primitive form of chapstick and skin moisturizer against the wind and cold. When you're living in a climate where the wind feels like it's actively trying to peel the skin from your face, a layer of sheep grease isn't a luxury, it's vital personal protective equipment. Then there was the milk. Sheep's milk, much richer and fattier than mare's milk, was the foundation for a whole suite of dairy products that formed the bulk of their diet, especially in the summer months. It was boiled to make a sort of skin, or clotted cream, called urum. It was fermented into yogurts. Most importantly, it was curdled and dried to create one of the most ingenious survival foods ever invented. Arule. To make arule. Milk curds were pressed to remove the whey, then shaped into small cakes or blocks and left to dry in the sun on the roof of the Gerd. They would become rock hard, almost fossilized. In this state, they were practically indestructible and would last for months or even years without spoiling. This was their winter food, their travel food, their emergency rations. You couldn't just bite into a piece of arule. You'd break your teeth. The idea was to hold it in your mouth, letting your saliva slowly soften it over the course of an hour or more. gradually releasing its sour, cheesy, nutrient-rich goodness. It was the original long-lasting, slow-release energy snack. For a Mongol scout on a long-range mission, a small leather bag of *abulul* was all the food they needed. It was lightweight, calorie-dense, and utterly impervious to the elements. It's a perfect example of the simple, rugged brilliance that defined their entire culture. But the sheep's contribution didn't end with food. Its wool was the very fabric of their existence. It was sheared and processed into felt, a thick, matted material that was one of the greatest insulators known to the pre-modern world. Felt was used to cover their homes, the gurs. It was used to make their boots, their hats, their cloaks, and their saddle blankets. A well-made felt cloak could turn away snow, sleet, and the biting wind. It wasn't pretty, and it probably smelled distinctly of damp sheep, but it was the difference between life and death. The wool was also spun into yarn for weaving, and the skin, with the wool still on it, was tanned to create warm sheepskin coats known as asdeals. When you picture a Mongol warrior, you might imagine leather and fur, but underneath it all, the foundation of their warmth was the humble, greasy, miraculous wool of the sheep. And finally, we come to what might be the sheep's most important product, something we would wrinkle our noses at, its dung. On the vast, treeless steppe, firewood was a rare and precious commodity, usually found only along riverbanks. The primary fuel for heating and cooking was *argil, dried animal dung. Sheep dung, being small, dense, and plentiful, was the most prized. Collecting *argil* was a constant chore for women and children. It would be gathered, dried in the sun, and stacked in pyramids near the Jerd. It was a smokeless, slow-burning fuel that provided the heat needed to survive the winter nights. The hearth was the sacred centre of the Mongol home, and it was fed not by wood, but by the droppings of their most essential animal. It's a stark reminder of how their entire world was a closed, self-sustaining loop. The grass fed the sheep, and the sheep fed and warmed the people who then guided the sheep to new grass. It was a perfect portable ecosystem. The third snout in the portfolio was the goat. Goats were, in many ways, the backup singers to the sheep. They were hardier, less picky eaters, and could survive on scrubbier pasture that would starve a sheep. This made them a crucial part of the herd, an insurance policy against lean times. They provided milk, meat, and hides, but their primary contribution was their luxurious undercoat of soft fibers, cashmere. For centuries, this has been one of the most prized textiles in the world, and it came from the scruffy, tough-as-nails goats of the high steppe. While the Mongols themselves used it, it was also a key trade good, one of their few exports to the sedentary world. However, goats were a double-edged sword. Their sharp hooves were harder on the fragile grasslands than the soft-footed sheep, and their indiscriminate eating habits could turn pasture into desert if they weren't managed carefully. A large herd of goats was a sign of a less prosperous family, one that couldn't afford to maintain a larger flock of the more valuable sheep. They were a symbol of survival, but not necessarily of wealth. They were the gritty, resourceful members of the five snouts, the ones who could make a meal out of almost anything. Moving up in size, we find the fourth snout, cattle, and more specifically in the higher altitudes, their shaggy, formidable cousins, the yaks. These were the heavy lifters of the nomadic world. While horses provided speed, cattle and yaks provided raw power. They were the engines of the great migrations, pulling the massive wooden carts that carried the girds and all the family's possessions. A Mongol migration was a sight to behold. It wasn't a frantic scramble. It was a slow, deliberate and orderly procession. At the head of the caravan would be a special cart, often pulled by a powerful bull or yak, carrying the family's sacred idols and ancestral spirits. Behind it, the rest of the household would follow, a slow-moving river of animals and people. The dismantled frame of the jur, the felt coverings, the chests, the cooking pots, everything would be loaded onto these groaning, creaking wooden carts. These carts weren't sleek or efficient. They were enormous, solid-wheeled behemoths designed for one purpose, to be indestructible. Some of the largest carts belonging to a chieftain or a wealthy family could be so wide that they were pulled by a team of over 20 oxen. On top of these colossal platforms, a full-sized jur could be erected, creating a sort of primitive, slow-moving mobile home. The emperor himself was said to travel in a cart palace of staggering dimensions. Cattle and yaks also provided milk, though it was considered less desirable than that of the mare or the ewe. Their hides were turned into the thickest, toughest leather, used for harnesses, ropes, and the soles of boots, and of course they provided meat. Beef was a valuable commodity, but an ox was also a vital piece of agricultural equipment. Slaughtering one was a major decision, usually reserved for a special feast or a dire emergency. Yaks, in particular, were masters of the high-altitude environment. Their massive lungs, their multi-layered coat of coarse outer hair and soft inner down, and their ability to thrive on sparse vegetation made them indispensable in the mountainous regions of the Mongol domain. They were the ultimate all-terrain vehicle, capable of carrying heavy loads over treacherous passes where a horse would struggle. Like everything else on the steppe, they were a perfect product of their harsh environment. Finally, we come to the fifth and final snout, the specialist, the long-haul trucker of the steppe, the two-humped Bactrian camel. Camels weren't as ubiquitous as sheep or horses, but in the drier, more desert-like regions of the empire, particularly along the trade routes that would later form the Silk Road, they were absolutely essential. A camel is a masterpiece of desert engineering. It can carry immense loads, far more than a horse or an ox, for incredible distances with very little water. Its shaggy coat provides insulation from both the scorching sun and the freezing desert nights. Its wide, padded feet allow it to walk on sand without sinking. For the Mongols, camels were the key to long-distance trade and communication across the vast Gobi Desert. They were the ships of the desert, connecting the eastern steppe with the oasis cities of Central Asia. They also provided milk, which was thick, rich, and said to have medicinal properties. Their wool was incredibly warm and could be woven into luxurious textiles. And when its working life was over, a camel provided a massive amount of meat. Much like the goat, the camel was a sign of a specific adaptation to a particularly challenging environment. A family with a large herd of camels was a family that had mastered the harshest, most unforgiving parts of the steppe. So you have your portfolio: horses for speed and war, sheep for daily sustenance, goats for hardy survival, cattle for heavy lifting, and camels for the long haul. Managing this menagerie was the central occupation of Mongol life. It was a year-long, generation-spanning science of animal husbandry, passed down not in books but through practical experience. They had a sophisticated, if unwritten, understanding of veterinary medicine. They knew how to help with difficult births, how to set broken bones, and how to treat common animal ailments using herbal remedies. They were expert breeders, carefully selecting for traits like stamina, hardiness, and temperament. And most importantly, they were masters of grazing. The key to the survival of the herds, and thus the people, was grass. But the steppe was not a limitless lawn. The grasslands were fragile, and overgrazing could destroy them, leading to starvation for the animals and ruin for the people. The Mongol solution to this was elegant in its simplicity. They never stopped moving. This constant movement wasn't a random, desperate wandering. It was a highly organized and predictable system of seasonal migration known as the Ota. Each clan or family group had its own traditional grazing territories, which were often vast, covering hundreds of square miles. Within this territory, they would have 4 distinct seasonal pastures, one for spring, one for summer, one for autumn, and one for winter. The art of being a Mongol was the art of knowing exactly when to leave one pasture and move to the next. The spring pasture was crucial. After a long, hard winter, the animals were weak and thin. The spring camps were usually in wide, open valleys where the first green shoots would appear. This was the birthing season, a time of intense work as the new generation of lambs, kids, and foals were born. The goal was to let the herds graze just enough to regain their strength, without damaging the delicate new growth of the grass. As summer arrived, they would move up into the high country. The summer pastures were in the mountains or the cooler, higher plains, where the grazing was rich and the water plentiful. This was a time of relative ease and abundance. The animals would fatten up, and the people would spend their days milking, making cheese, and preparing the dairy products that would see them through the winter. It was a time for festivals, for horse races, for wrestling matches, and for marriages. It was the brief, glorious season of plenty. When the air began to cool and the grasses started to turn yellow, it was time for the autumn migration. They would move down from the highlands into more protected areas, pastures where the grass had been left to grow long all summer. This was the season of preparation. Animals would be sorted, the older, weaker ones would be culled for meat, which was then preserved for the winter. The felt on the gers would be repaired or replaced. The final stores of *argyle* would be gathered. It was a race against time, a final flurry of activity before the great enemy descended. The winter camp was the most critical choice of all. It had to be in a place that offered shelter from the relentless, soul-destroying wind. This usually meant a valley sheltered by mountains or a forested area, a rare luxury. The goal for the winter was not to thrive, but simply to survive. The animals would huddle together for warmth, their numbers greatly reduced from the summer peak. The people would spend most of their time indoors, conserving energy, telling stories, and living off the food they had so painstakingly preserved. The winter pasture was chosen for its ability to protect, not to fatten. It was a fortress against the cold. This cycle, this *ot*, was the heartbeat of the Mongol world. It ensured that the grasslands were never exhausted, allowing them to regenerate year after year. It was a system of sustainable agriculture on an epic scale, not because of some abstract environmental ideal, but because their very lives depended on it. To misjudge the timing of a move, to choose the wrong winter pasture, could mean the death of the entire herd, and with it, the family. They didn't just live on the land, they read it. They understood its subtle language, the colour of the grass, the direction of the wind, the behaviour of the birds, with an intimacy that we can barely imagine. And at the centre of this perpetually moving world was the one piece of stability, the one constant home, the *ger*. To call a reindeer a tent is to do it a grave disservice. It's like calling a cathedral a shed. The *ger* is a masterpiece of nomadic engineering, a perfect piece of architecture for a life lived in motion. It's light enough to be transported by a couple of camels or a single ox cart, yet strong enough to withstand the gale-force winds and crushing snows of a steppe winter. It can be taken down in an hour and put back up in 2. It is, quite simply, one of the most brilliant and enduring designs for a human dwelling ever conceived. Let's build one together, just in our minds. The foundation of the *terrastus isn't on the ground, it's the walls. These are made of several collapsible lattice sections called the *. Each section is a grid of wooden poles, usually willow or birch, held together by leather straps. When collapsed, it's a compact, easily transportable bundle. When expanded, it forms a sturdy circular section of wall. Depending on the size of the *terrastus, 4, 5 or 6 of these *. would be linked together to form a perfect circle. The circular shape is no accident. It's aerodynamically sound, offering the least resistance to the constant wind. There are no corners for the wind to catch and tear at. Next comes the door, the *helga*. This is a solid wooden frame with a door, always facing south. The south was the direction of warmth and the sun. To have your door face north was considered deeply unlucky, an invitation for evil spirits and bad weather to enter your home. Now, for the roof. In the very centre of the structure, 2 tall, often beautifully carved wooden pillars, the *bagana* are erected. Resting on top of them is the most sacred and important part of the *ger*, the roof ring, or *tuno*. The *tuno* is a wooden wheel, a circle with spokes radiating out from the centre. It's the crown of the home. It serves as a smoke hole for the central fire, a window to let in light, and a sundial. A Mongol could tell the time of day with surprising accuracy, simply by seeing which spoke the sunlight was hitting on the *tuno*. It was also their connection to the sky, the realm of the eternal blue sky god, Tengri. From this central ring, dozens of long, straight roof poles, the *uni*, are laid with one end resting on the *tunu*, and the other end tied to the top of the lattice walls. This creates the gentle, conical slope of the roof. The whole wooden skeleton is now complete, a beautiful, self-supporting structure of tension and balance, held together not by nails or screws but by rope and leather straps. This flexibility was key. In a high wind, the *gerd's poled a stot wouldn't break. It would give and flex like a living thing. Now we wrap it. The first layer to go over the wooden frame is a thin cotton sheet, which acts as an inner curtain. Then comes the real magic, the layers of felt. Depending on the season, 1, 2, or even 3 thick layers of oiled waterproof sheep's wool felt are stretched over the frame. This is the insulation. A stack with multiple layers of felt is so well insulated that even in the depths of winter, a small fire in the center can keep the interior remarkably warm. In the summer, the bottom edge of the felt could be rolled up to allow a cooling breeze to flow through. The asterisk wasn't just a shelter, it was a sophisticated piece of climate control technology. Over the felt, a final layer of canvas or a decorative covering is added to protect the wool from the rain and sun. And finally, the whole structure is cinched tight with long ropes made of horsehair or leather, binding the layers together and anchoring the entire home to the earth. And there you have it, a warm, dry, secure, and surprisingly spacious home, created from nothing more than wood, wool, and leather, the original tiny home, but with a legacy stretching back thousands of years. The interior of the Gerd asterisk, was not just a random living space, it was a highly organized microcosm of the Mongol universe. Every object and every person had their designated place, dictated by tradition and spiritual belief. As you enter through the south-facing door, always stepping with your right foot first, and never ever stepping on the threshold, which was believed to be the home of a protective spirit, you enter a sacred, ordered space. Directly opposite the door, in the northern part of the asterisk Gerd, was the place of honor. This is where the family altar would be kept, along with chests containing the family's most valuable possessions. It was also where the eldest members of the family or honored guests would be seated. The western side of the asterisk was the men's domain. This is where their saddles, harnesses, bows, and other tools of the hunt and war would be stored. The eastern side was the women's domain. Here you would find the cooking pots, the water containers, the leather bags for making asterisk, and all the tools associated with the domestic life of the home. And in the very center, directly beneath the asterisk tuno was the hearth. The fire was the soul of the asterisk It was sacred. It was considered a terrible breach of etiquette and a spiritual offense to ever point a knife at the fire or to throw garbage or water into it. The fire belonged to a fire spirit, a goddess who protected the family. The smoke rising up through the asterisk tuno was a prayer, an offering connecting the family on earth to the gods in the sky. Life in the asterisk was communal. Privacy as we know it didn't really exist. Families slept on felt mats or low wooden beds arranged around the perimeter. At night in the winter, young or vulnerable animals might even be brought inside to share the warmth. It was a space filled with the smells of mutton stew, smoky argle fire, and fermenting milk. It was filled with the sounds of conversation, the crackling of the hearth, and the howl of the wind outside, a sound made comforting by the sturdy, warm embrace of the felt walls. It was a perfect expression of their worldview, a small, warm, ordered circle of family, centered on a sacred fire, moving together through a vast, chaotic, and often hostile world. This whole nomadic engine, the 5 snouts, the seasonal migration, the portable home, was all designed to solve one fundamental problem: how to turn grass into people. The steppe's one great resource was its endless sea of grass, but humans can't eat grass, so the Mongols outsourced the job to their animals. The animals ate the grass and the Mongols ate the animals, or more accurately, their products. The Mongol diet was a direct consequence of this reality. It was what a modern nutritionist might politely call limited, or perhaps extremely protein-forward. For about 9 months of the year, their diet consisted almost exclusively of 2 things: meat and dairy. That's it. Vegetables were almost non-existent, save for a few wild onions or roots they might be able to forage. Grains were a rare luxury, obtained through trade with sedentary peoples. Their entire nutritional world revolved around what their herds could provide. In the summer, the white food season, dairy dominated. They consumed vast quantities of eggs, yogurt, cheese, cream, and the hard, dried ararul. This dairy-heavy diet was their main source of the vitamins and minerals that they weren't getting from plants. It was a time of relative plenty, of fattening up for the lean times ahead. As autumn turned to winter, the diet shifted to red food. This was the meat season. The culling of the herds in the autumn provided a massive amount of fresh meat, which was feasted upon. But this fresh supply wouldn't last long. Preservation was key, and the Mongols were masters of it. Their primary method wasn't salting, which was a rare commodity. It was drying. Their most famous preserved food was borts. Borts was the Mongol equivalent of beef jerky, but taken to an extreme. Long, thin strips of meat, usually from a cow or a yak, were hung up to dry in the open air. The constant wind and low humidity of the steppe would desiccate the meat incredibly quickly before it had a chance to rot. The strips would be left out until they were hard and brittle, reduced to about a third of their original weight. This dried meat was then pounded and ground into a coarse, fibrous powder. This powder was then packed tightly into a cleaned and dried animal stomach or bladder, which was then sewn shut. This was pure, unadulterated protein. A single cow could be reduced to a powder that would fit into a bag the size of a man's fist, and in this form it was virtually immortal. It was the perfect military ration. A Mongol soldier could carry enough borts to sustain him for weeks or months. To eat it, he would simply take a pinch of the powder and boil it in water to create a nourishing, if probably not very flavorful, meat broth. Sometimes they would mix it with a bit of wild onion or whatever else they could find, but often it was just the reconstituted meat. This diet, so alien to us, was perfectly suited to their lifestyle. It was high in fat and protein, providing the immense caloric energy needed for a life of hard physical labor in a brutal climate. The reliance on fermented dairy products also likely populated their digestive systems with a host of beneficial bacteria, helping them extract every last nutrient from their limited food sources. They were, quite literally, fueled by their herds. This entire system, this nomadic engine, was so successful, so efficient, that it created a surplus, not a surplus of goods in a warehouse, but a surplus of time, energy, and most importantly, people. The population of the steppe grew, the herds grew, and eventually, the vast open grasslands began to feel a little crowded. The intricate balance of the began to come under pressure. A single bad winter, a summer drought, could now spell disaster, not just for a single family, but for an entire region, leading to conflict over the best pastures and water sources. It was this pressure, this internal tension within a perfectly adapted but ultimately limited system, that created the conditions for what came next. The nomadic engine had built the most resilient, mobile, and self-sufficient people on Earth. They were tough, disciplined, and accustomed to constant hardship. They possessed a logistical genius born of a lifetime of moving their entire world 4 times a year. They were powered by a high-energy diet that made them capable of incredible feats of endurance. They were a coiled spring. All they needed was a hand to unite them and point them in a single direction. The machine of survival was about to be retooled. Its incredible efficiency turned from the task of raising sheep to the task of raising empires. The children of the steppe, who had spent millennia mastering their own world, were about to introduce themselves to everyone else's, and the world would never, ever be the same. But before that machine could be pointed outward, it had to run. It had to cohere. An army is more than just a collection of skilled individuals. It's a society with a shared purpose. An empire is more than an army. It's a culture, a system of beliefs, a set of rules that allow millions of people to function as one. And the raw material for the Mongol Empire wasn't iron or gold. It was something far stronger, far more complex, and forged in the same unforgiving crucible as their bodies and their diets. It was their social world. Chapter 3. The Sinews of the Horde, Kinship, Law, and Social Order. To understand how a scattered people of the High Plains could conquer the world, we first have to understand how they managed to conquer the monumental challenge of simply getting along with each other. We have to look at the invisible threads, the sinews of the Horde, that bound them together. These were the intricate, unwritten rules of kinship, loyalty, and law, that turned a collection of families into a potential nation, and a potential nation into a force of nature. This wasn't a world of grand marble courthouses or dusty law books. This was a world where law lived in the memory of the elders, where loyalty was sealed with a taste of blood, and where your entire identity, your safety, your very survival, was defined by who you called family. Let's step away from the individual Mongol warrior for a moment, that perfect survival machine we just met. Let's zoom in, past the bow and the horse, and into the heart of his world, the jur, the felt tent. Because everything, absolutely everything, starts here. The fundamental unit of Mongol society, the atom from which everything else was built, was the family, not the nuclear family we think of today. A couple of parents, a few kids, a golden retriever. No, this was the extended, multi-generational, all-hands-on-deck version. Inside a single jur you might find a man, his wife, all wives, his young children, perhaps his aging parents, and maybe even a younger brother or an orphaned cousin who had been taken in. The jur was a circle, and the family was the life that filled it. It was a self-contained, mobile universe. Imagine the inside of that jur as night falls on the steppe. The wind, that constant whining companion, pushes against the felt walls, but inside, a small fire of dried dung in the central hearth pushes back with a gentle smoky warmth. The space is not large, every object has its place, dictated by tradition and sheer practicality. The man's saddle and weapons are kept on one side, a place of honor. The woman's tools for milking, cheese-making and sewing are on the other. It's a world divided by gender roles, not out of malice, but out of a brutal efficiency. Survival was a full-time job for everyone, and the labor was divided into a perfectly interlocking system. The head of this tiny universe was, of course, the patriarch. His authority was nearly absolute. He owned the herds, he made the decisions about where and when to move, and he represented the family to the outside world. But his power wasn't that of a tyrant in a palace. It was the power of a ship's captain, responsible for every soul on board. A foolish decision didn't just cost him money, it could cost his children their lives. His authority was earned daily, through his knowledge of pastures, his skill in hunting, and his ability to navigate the treacherous social landscape of the steppe. His wife, or his senior wife if he had more than one, was the captain of the jur itself. While he managed the world outside, she was the absolute master of the world inside. She controlled the food, the clothing, the children's upbringing, and the family's portable wealth, the felt, the leather goods, the utensils. She was, in modern terms, the chief operating officer of the family enterprise. Her work was unending, from the pre-dawn milking of the mares and ewes to the late-night mending of a leather boot by firelight. Her hands were never still. She was the engine of the household economy. And the children were not idle decorations. From the moment they could walk, they were integrated into the family's survival machine. A small boy learned to ride a horse almost before he could walk properly. His first toy was a tiny bow, and his first job was to watch over the lambs, protecting them from wolves and eagles. A young girl shadowed her mother, learning the 1,000 intricate tasks of a steppe woman, how to churn milk into a dozen different products, how to recognize medicinal herbs, how to sew with a sinew thread, and most importantly, how to erect and dismantle the jur, the family's entire world, in under an hour. There was no school but the school of observation. Your parents were your teachers, and the final exam was surviving the next winter. This family unit, this humming beehive of activity within a felt circle, was the first and most important layer of a Mongol's identity. Before you were a member of a tribe, before you were a warrior, you were a son or daughter of a specific household. Your honor was their honor, your shame was their shame, and your survival was inextricably linked to theirs. If your family's herd was stolen, you starved with them. If your family prospered, you ate well with them. It was a bond of absolute interdependence. You think your family gatherings are intense. Imagine if your cousin forgetting to close the sheep pen at night meant you might not eat for a week. That's a different level of shared responsibility. But a single family, as tough and self-sufficient as it was just one lonely jur on a vast and unforgiving landscape. It was a single boat on a very big, very dangerous ocean. A sudden blizzard, a disease that swept through the herd, or a raid from a rival group could wipe out a single family in a matter of days. The ever-present antagonist on the steppe wasn't just the cold or the wind, it was the gnawing threat of isolation, so the first step beyond the family was to find more family. This is where we encounter the next critical layer of Mongol society, the clan. In their language, the obog. A clan was essentially a collection of families who could trace their ancestry back to a single common male ancestor. It was a family reunion, but one that never ended. These weren't distant relatives you see once a year. These were your cousins, your uncles, your second cousins, all grazing their herds in the same general area, migrating along the same ancestral routes. They were your neighborhood watch, your insurance policy, and your social circle, all rolled into one. The leader of a clan, often the most respected elder from the most senior family line, was called the beg. He wasn't a king, he was more like a respected chairman of the board. He arbitrated disputes between families within the clan, arguments over stolen sheep or stray horses, the perennial legal battles of the steppe. He coordinated the seasonal migrations, ensuring that the clan's collective herds didn't overgraze a precious pasture. And most importantly, he organized the clan for mutual defense. If a single family in the clan was attacked, it wasn't just their problem, it was the entire clan's problem. The cry for help would go out, and men from a dozen other girds would grab their bows, leap onto their horses, and ride to the aid of their kin. A raid on your second cousin's herd was an attack on the obog itself. This was the strength of the clan. It scaled up the power of the family unit. A lone wolf might be able to pick off a single sheep, but it would think twice before attacking the entire flock when it was surrounded by watchful sheepdogs. The clan was the ring of sheepdogs. Life within the clan was a constant flowing river of social interaction. You shared pastures, you shared hunting grounds, and you shared news and gossip around communal campfires. Your children played with your cousins' children. Your potential marriage partners were found within the web of other nearby clans. It was your social safety net. If your herd was devastated by a winter storm, it would be your clan members who would lend you a few animals to get you back on your feet. A loan understood by all to be a sacred obligation, to be repaid if you could, and to be passed on to others if you couldn't. This system of mutual support, known as nokor, was the glue that held the clan together. It was a recognition that on the steppe, wealth was fleeting. Your herd could be gone tomorrow. Your only real lasting security was the loyalty of your kin. However, the clan system had a built-in weakness, a fatal flaw that kept the steppe in a state of constant, low-level turmoil. That flaw was competition. While you were loyal to your own clan, you were deeply, profoundly suspicious of every other asterisk clan. The steppe was a zero-sum game. There was only so much good pasture, only so many good watering holes. Another clan's success often felt like it came at your expense. Their expanding herd was eating the grass your herd needed. Their hunting party was taking the game your family needed. This led to a culture of endemic raiding and feuding. The theft of horses was the most common spark. A horse wasn't just transportation, it was a status symbol, a weapon of war, and a vital economic asset. Stealing another clan's horses was a direct blow to their power and prestige, and it demanded a response. A small horse raid could easily escalate into a cycle of revenge killings that could last for generations. The asterisk secret history of the Mongols, asterisk the foundational text of their story, is filled with such tales of betrayals between clans, of kidnappings, of tit-for-tat raids that simmer for years before boiling over. Temujin's, the future Genghis Khan's own mother, Holon, was kidnapped by his father from a rival clan. His own wife Borte would later be kidnapped in a revenge raid, setting in motion the first great military campaign of his life. This was the normal rhythm of the steppe, intense loyalty within your group, and intense, often violent, competition with everyone else. The world was starkly divided into us and them. So, if the family was a single boat and the clan was a small flotilla, how did they ever manage to build a navy? For that, we need to zoom out one more level, to the largest and most volatile social structure of the pre-imperial steppe, the tribe, or amag. A tribe was a coalition of clans. Unlike the clan, which was bound by the hard ties of blood, the tribe was usually bound by the much softer ties of political and military convenience. A group of clans, often living in the same region or facing a common powerful enemy, would agree to ally with each other. They would elect a leader from among the clan chiefs, a man they would call Khan. This position, Khan, was not hereditary. It was not a divine right. It was a job title, and you could be fired. A man became Khan through a combination of noble lineage. He usually had to come from a respected clan, proven military skill, and, most importantly, generosity. A successful Khan was one who could lead his combined tribal forces on successful raids against other tribes, and then, crucially, distribute the captured spoils, the horses, the sheep, the slaves, the luxury goods, among his followers, in a way that was seen as fair and generous. His authority rested entirely on his ability to deliver prosperity and security. If the raids dried up, if he lost a major battle, or if he was perceived as hoarding the loot for his own clan, the other clan chiefs would simply pack up their gurs, withdraw their support, and the tribe would dissolve back into its component parts. The Aimbag was a fair-weather alliance, a fragile house of cards built on the shifting sands of self-interest. This is the world Temujin was born into, a world of nested loyalties and constant friction. He was a member of the Borjigan clan, which was itself a part of the Kiyad tribe, but these labels were fluid. When his father Yusuge, a minor Khan, was poisoned by a rival group, his tribe abandoned him. The other clans simply rode away, taking their herds and their warriors, leaving the young Temujin, his mother, and his siblings to fend for themselves on the empty steppe. They were cast out, made clanless, which was practically a death sentence. His entire early life was a brutal lesson in the fragility of these larger alliances and the absolute primacy of close personal loyalty. He learned that a title like Khan was meaningless without the power to enforce it, and that power came from inspiring a loyalty that went deeper than just a promise of loot. He would need new ways to bind men to him, new kinds of glue to hold his society together, and the steppe culture, for all its fractious violence, provided two powerful tools for this: the strategic marriage and the sworn brotherhood. Let's talk about marriage first. In the modern world, for many, marriage is seen as the culmination of a romantic journey between two individuals. On the steppe, it was anything but. It was a cold, hard, strategic transaction between two families, or more often, two clans. It was the medieval version of a corporate merger. The goal was not love, the goal was alliance. The Mongols practiced something called exogamy, which is a simple rule: you must marry outside your own clan. This was a brilliant, if perhaps unintentional, social technology. It forced clans to constantly build bridges to one another. Every marriage was a thread of kinship woven into the vast, fraying tapestry of steppe society. When you gave your daughter in marriage to the son of another clan's chief, you weren't just losing a daughter, you were gaining a set of powerful, armed and obligated in-laws. You now had a vested interest in their success, and they in yours. An attack on your new son-in-law's clan was now, indirectly, an attack on your own family. The negotiations for these marriages were complex and deeply serious. The groom's family had to provide a kala or bride price to the bride's family. This wasn't buying a wife, it was a gesture of respect, and a compensation to her family for the loss of her labour and her presence. The bride price could be substantial: a number of horses, cattle, sheep, or valuable goods like silk or metal cauldrons. It was a public demonstration of the groom's family's wealth and the value they placed on the new connection. A wealthy chief might secure an alliance with another powerful clan by offering a huge bride price for their daughter. A poorer family might have to scrape together every last sheep to secure a wife for their son from a less prestigious lineage. When the deal was struck, the wedding itself was a major event. The bride would travel to her new family's camp in a grand procession, bringing with her a dowry. This dowry was her own property, her contribution to the new household. It often consisted of the things she would need to establish her own jur: felt hangings, bedding, cooking pots, and perhaps some livestock given to her by her parents. She was not arriving empty-handed, she was a partner in the new venture. The journey itself was symbolic. She was leaving her own kin, her own world, and entering another. It was often a traumatic and difficult transition for a young woman, but her role was critical. She was the living embodiment of the alliance. Her children would carry the blood of two clans, forever linking their destinies. Through her, the men of the two clans became brothers-in-law, uncles, nephews. The formal political alliance was cemented by these new, intimate titles of kinship. If you think navigating the politics of your in-laws is tricky, imagine if a family squabble could lead to a multi-clan war. The stakes were a little higher. But kinship, even kinship forged by marriage, had its limits. It was often stretched thin over long distances and generations. Sometimes a more powerful, more intimate, and more personal bond was needed. For this, the Mongols had the institution of the Anda, the sworn brotherhood. The Anda relationship was one of the most sacred bonds in Mongol society, in many cases considered even stronger than the bond between biological brothers. It was a formal, ritualized pledge of eternal loyalty between two men. It was a conscious choice, a deliberate creation of a family bond, where one did not exist by blood. The ceremony itself was deeply symbolic. The two men would become under by publicly declaring their loyalty, exchanging gifts, often something deeply personal, like a favorite horse or a coat, and in some accounts by performing a ritual that involved mixing their blood. They might each prick a finger and let the blood drip into a cup of milk or spirits, which they would then both drink. In doing so, they were symbolically becoming one person, their life forces mingling. They were no longer just friends, they were now, in spirit and in oath, brothers. From that moment on, their bond was absolute. They were expected to help each other in all things, to defend each other to the death, to raise each other's children if one of them fell in battle. The property of one was, in a time of need, the property of the other. An insult to your Anand was an insult to you, and it required an immediate and violent response. Temujin himself relied on this institution throughout his rise to power. His most famous and a relationship was with a young man named Jamuka from another tribe. As boys they had played together on the banks of the Onon River, exchanged gifts of knucklebones, and sworn the Anda oath. This bond of brotherhood was for a time the central alliance of Temujin's early career. They fought side by side, shared victories, and together began to unite clans under their joint leadership. But the story of Temujin and Jamuka is also a tragic illustration of the tension within Mongol society. Jamuka was a traditionalist. He believed in the old aristocratic order, where leadership belonged to those of high birth. Temujin, on the other hand, was a revolutionary. He promoted men based on merit and loyalty, not their lineage. Eventually, their different philosophies and their own ambitions drove a wedge between them. Their bond of sworn brotherhood, the most sacred oath a Mongol man could take, shattered under the weight of their political rivalry, leading to a bitter and protracted civil war. The ultimate tragedy was that even in their final confrontation, after Temujin had captured his one-time brother, he offered him forgiveness and a renewed alliance. But the bond was too broken, and Jamuka, in a final act of pride, asked to be executed in a noble manner, without the shedding of his blood. The failure of this, and a relationship nearly destroyed Temujin, but it also taught him a valuable lesson. Personal loyalty, while powerful, was not enough to build a nation. He needed something bigger. He needed a law that applied to everyone. This brings us to the final, and perhaps most crucial piece of the Mongol social puzzle, the unwritten law of the steppe. This was known as the yosun, or the Toro. There were no books, no lawyers, no courthouses. The Toro was a set of traditions, customs, and precedents that lived in the collective memory of the people. It was the steppe's operating system, the code that governed behavior and ensured a baseline of order in a world that constantly flirted with chaos. The Tor was not a detailed legal code covering every possible infraction. It was more of a set of core principles, a moral compass for the nation. Many of these principles were born of stark necessity. For example, hospitality was one of the most sacred tenets of the Tor. A traveller, even an enemy, who came to your jur in peace, had to be given food and shelter. To refuse hospitality was a grave dishonour. This wasn't just about being nice. On the vast, sparsely populated steppe, where a sudden storm could kill you and the next camp might be a day's ride away, the jur of a stranger was often the only hope of survival. The rule of hospitality ensured that everyone, by offering shelter, was also ensuring that shelter would be available to them in their own time of need. It was a system of distributed, decentralized survival. Property law, as you might imagine, was overwhelmingly concerned with one thing: animals. A man's wealth, his status, his very life, was tied up in his herds. Therefore, animal theft, especially horse theft, was one of the most serious crimes a Mongol could commit. It wasn't just theft, it was an attack on a family's livelihood. The punishment was severe, often death. There was no ambiguity. You did not touch another man's herd. This strictness was essential to maintaining peace between clans. It was an attempt to short-circuit the endless cycles of raid and revenge that were sparked by livestock disputes. Another core principle was the absolute importance of loyalty to one's leader and one's clan. Betrayal, cowardice in battle, or desertion were capital offences. In a world where your group's survival depended on every man standing his ground during a raid, there was zero tolerance for anyone who broke ranks. The group was everything. The individual was subordinate to the needs of the collective. And the enforcement of the Tor, it was direct and public. If a dispute arose, it would be brought before the clan elder or the tribal khan. He would listen to both sides, perhaps consult with other respected old men, and then make a judgment based on his knowledge of tradition and precedent. There was no lengthy appeals process. His word was final. Punishments were carried out immediately: a flogging, the confiscation of property, or execution. Justice was swift, simple, and designed to be a stark deterrent. The goal was not rehabilitation. It was the restoration of order and the removal of the disruptive element. It was a legal system that was, what we might politely call, brutally efficient. But who was it that taught these laws? Who ensured that the complex web of kinship was remembered, that the stories of ancestors were passed down, that the children learned the difference between right and wrong according to the Tory? The answer in large part brings us to the most underestimated and misunderstood figures in the Mongol world: the women. It's easy, when looking at a militaristic, patriarchal society, to dismiss the women as silent background figures. In the case of the Mongols, that would be a profound mistake. The Mongol woman was not a delicate, cloistered creature. She was a tough, capable, and often powerful partner in the enterprise of survival. She was the anchor of the Mongol world. We've already touched on her role as the manager of the household economy, but her influence went far beyond the jur. While the men were often away for long periods on hunts that could last for weeks, or on military campaigns that could last for months or even years, it was the women who ran the entire society. They were the ones who managed the camps, oversaw the migrations, and made the day-to-day decisions that kept the Mongol nation alive. They were, in effect, the civil administration of the Horde. A camp of 1,000 warriors away on a campaign was also a camp of 1,000 women plus children and the elderly, functioning as a self-governing community. They had significant economic power. The jur and all its contents were considered the woman's domain. A man could not sell a household item or even an animal from the herd that was designated for the family's subsistence without his wife's permission. Upon a man's death, it was his youngest son who inherited the family hearth and the core of the property, but it was his widow who administered that property until the son came of age. An experienced widow, the head of a powerful family, could be a formidable political and economic force in her own right. And they were tough, incredibly tough. The physical labour of a steppe woman was immense. They were responsible for milking dozens, sometimes hundreds of animals every single day. They processed that milk into yogurt, cheese, and the famously potent fermented mare's milk, erg. They butchered animals, tanned hides, and made felt for the girdis, a physically demanding process of wetting, rolling, and beating wool for hours. And of course, they had the sole responsibility for packing up the entire household onto carts and re-establishing it at the new pasture. A Mongol man's home was his girdi, but that girdi was only a home because of the unending labour of his wife. Perhaps most importantly, women were the keepers of social cohesion. They were the diplomats of the family. Through their relationships with their own birth clan and their new marital clan, they smoothed over disputes and maintained the alliances that their marriages had created. They were the educators, teaching their children the stories, the songs, and the unwritten laws of the Tor. They instilled the values of endurance, loyalty, and respect for tradition. While the men provided the military might of the Horde, the women provided its soul, its continuity, its resilience, the high status of women, relative to many other contemporary societies, is reflected in the law. Under the Toro, the kidnapping or assault of a woman was a capital crime. This wasn't necessarily born of a modern sense of chivalry, but of hard-nosed practicality. Women were essential assets. An attack on a woman was an attack on the integrity of a family, a disruption of the economic engine of the household, and a grave insult that could easily spark a blood feud. Protecting women was about protecting the stability of the entire social order. This complex social machine, the interdependent family, the protective clan, the fragile tribe, all stitched together with the threads of strategic marriage, sworn brotherhood, and the unwritten law, and all anchored by the strength of its women. This was the raw material that Temujin inherited. It was a system that produced incredibly tough, resilient, and loyal people. But it was also a system that was perpetually caught in a self-destructive cycle of infighting, raiding, and disunity. The very loyalty that made the clan strong also made it hostile to outsiders. The ambition that created a Khan also sowed the seeds of his tribe's eventual dissolution. The steppe was full of powerful men, brilliant commanders, and charismatic leaders. For centuries they had risen and fallen, uniting a few tribes for a generation before their fragile coalition would crumble back into its warring parts. They were all working within the existing system. Temujin's genius was that he didn't just work within the system. He looked at the machine, understood its every gear and lever, and then he rebuilt it. He saw the incredible power of the loyalty a Mongol felt for his clan, and he thought, what if I could make them feel that loyalty, not just to their own kin, but to me, and to a new, larger entity? What if I could take all these small competing clans and forge them into a single superclan, a nation, and nine all these mores? He would take the principle of the Anda and apply it on a mass scale, creating a personal bond with his commanders that superseded their old clan loyalties. He would take the Tor, the unwritten customs of the steppe, and formalize it, expand it, and make it the supreme law of his new nation, a law to which even he was subject. He would shatter the old tribal structures, deliberately mixing men from different clans into new military units, forcing them to build a new identity as warriors of his army, rather than as members of the Kiard or the Merkit or the Tatar. He took the raw material, the sinews of kinship, law, and social order that had allowed the Mongols to survive the steppe, and he reforged them into the sinews of an empire. He redirected all that incredible, powerful loyalty inward towards the new Mongol nation, and then he aimed it outward. The children of the steppe, who had spent millennia mastering the art of survival and the complex dance of social cohesion, were now unified. The machine was finally running at full power, and it was about to change the world forever. The social order that was designed to manage herds of sheep would now be used to manage a conquered world. The family was about to become an empire. Directed all that incredible, powerful loyalty inward towards the new Mongol nation, and then he aimed it outward. The children of the steppe, who had spent millennia mastering the art of survival and the complex dance of social cohesion, were now unified. The machine was finally running at full power, and it was about to change the world forever. The social order that was designed to manage herds of sheep would now be used to manage a conquered world. The family was about to become an empire. Chapter 4. The Eternal Blue Sky. Spirituality and Worldview. But what powered this machine? What was the software running on this new, terrifyingly efficient hardware of empire? A group of people doesn't just decide to conquer the world because they're bored. There has to be a reason, a justification that goes deeper than pure ambition. To understand the Mongol explosion, we have to look up. We have to tilt our heads back and stare into the same endless, achingly blue sky that they did. Because for the Mongols, the sky wasn't just a ceiling for the world, it was the world's ultimate authority. Their entire operating system, their sense of purpose, was written in the vast, silent and ever-present dome above them. This wasn't just about strategy or social structure anymore. This was about destiny. A destiny they believed was handed to them directly from the heavens. Their spiritual world was called Tengrism, though it's unlikely they ever used that specific term. That's a label we've put on it, a convenient folder for a system of belief that was less a religion and more a fundamental way of experiencing reality. There was no single holy book, no stone tablets with commandments, no complex and rigid dogma. You didn't really convert to Tengrism. You were just born into it, the way you're born into gravity. It was the air you breathed, the ground you walked on, and the sky that watched over everything. At the very top of this cosmic org chart was Tengri, the eternal blue sky. Imagine for a moment that you live your entire life on the steppe. There are no skyscrapers, no light pollution, no dense forests to block your view. For 360 degrees, your world is a vast rolling ocean of grass meeting a dome of sky that is so immense, so absolute, it feels less like a feature of the landscape and more like the very fabric of existence. It's the first thing you see in the morning and the last thing you see at night. Its moods dictate your life. A clear blue sky means a good day for travel, for hunting. Dark, heavy clouds mean you hunker down. You protect the herds, you survive. The sun, the moon, the stars. They aren't just distant lights. They are Tengri's eyes, his expressions. So, who was Tengri? He wasn't a kindly, bearded man sitting on a cloud, personally listening to every individual prayer. The Mongol conception of the ultimate deity was far more abstract, more impersonal, and in a way more profound. Tengri was the source of all power, the ultimate arbiter of fate, the cosmic force that set everything in motion. He was less of a micromanager and more of a cosmic CEO. He created the world, established the fundamental order of things, the way the sun rises, the way seasons change, the way life and death work, and then he largely lets it run. His will, or acutus ast, was a kind of divine energy or fortune. It was granted to those who were worthy, particularly to rulers. A Khan didn't rule because his father was a Khan, or because he was the strongest. He ruled because Tengri had granted him the acutus asterisk to do so. This was a phenomenally powerful political tool. If you were a successful leader, if your herds were healthy, and your tribe was victorious in battle, it was clear evidence that you had Tengri's favour. Your success was its own justification. Conversely, if you failed, if you were defeated, if a plague swept through your livestock, it was a sign that Tengri had withdrawn his favour. You had lost the mandate of heaven. This meant that Mongol politics was inherently fluid and brutally meritocratic. You couldn't just inherit power and coast. You had to continually prove, through your actions and your success, that the sky still approved of you. This is why a leader like Temujin, who started with almost nothing, could rise to become Genghis Khan. His string of victories against seemingly impossible odds was the ultimate proof that Temujin had chosen him for something great. He wasn't just a clever warlord, he was an instrument of cosmic will. Prayers to Tengri weren't flowery, desperate pleas. They were often simple, direct and respectful. A Mongol warrior before a battle might look up at the sky and state his intention, almost as if he were reporting to a commanding officer. He wasn't begging for victory, so much as aligning himself with the perceived will of the universe, trusting that Tengri would grant strength to the worthy. It's a worldview that breeds an incredible sense of self-reliance and fatalism. You do everything in your power to succeed, you act with honor and strength, and the rest is up to a force far greater than yourself. There's a certain calm in that. You don't waste energy on anxieties you can't control. You focus on your part of the cosmic bargain, to be strong, to be worthy. The sky will handle the rest. But Tengri wasn't the only major player. If the sky was the father, the source of order and power, the earth was the mother. Her name was Etugen Eke, often translated as Mother Earth or the Earth Mother. She was the grounding force to Tengri's celestial authority. While Tengri was vast, distant, and concerned with fate and power, Etugen was immediate, nurturing, and fertile. She was the soil under your feet, the grass that fed your horses, the water in the rivers that gave you life. The relationship with Etugen was one of deep, abiding respect, born from a lifetime of total dependence. The steppe wasn't a resource to be exploited. It was a living entity to be coexisted with. You didn't just take from the earth, you lived in a delicate balance with it. This manifested in a series of taboos that were, at their core, proto-environmental laws. For instance, it was strictly forbidden to pollute rivers or springs. You wouldn't wash dirty clothes directly in a river, and you certainly wouldn't relieve yourself in or near a source of fresh water. This wasn't just about hygiene, though it certainly had that practical benefit. It was seen as a profound act of disrespect to Etugen, like throwing dirt in your own mother's face. Doing so could anger her, which might lead to sickness, drought, or the drying up of pastures. The consequences were direct and tangible. Similarly, there was a deep-seated reverence for the land itself. Spilling blood directly onto the soil was considered a major offence. In executions, particularly of nobles, the Mongols went to extraordinary lengths to avoid this. A condemned prince might be rolled up in a carpet and trampled by horses, or have his back broken. The goal was to end the life without defiling the earth with their blood. It sounds brutal to us, and it was, but the underlying logic was spiritual. The life force was returned to the cosmos, without staining the sacred body of the Earth Mother. Fire, too, was seen as a sacred element, a purifying force, and a gateway to the spirit world. It was a child of Tengri and Etugen. You would never put a knife into a fire, or douse it with water, or throw garbage into it. The hearth fire in a ger was the heart of the home, a symbol of the family's life and spirit. It had to be treated with the utmost respect. This duality of Sky Father and Earth Mother created a complete and balanced cosmology. Power, destiny, and justice flowed down from Tengri. Life, sustenance, and stability flowed up from Etugen. The Mongol lived at the intersection of these two great forces, a tiny human figure in a vast, spiritually charged landscape. Their entire existence was about navigating this relationship, showing proper respect to both, and maintaining the balance. Forget your modern worries about recycling bins. For the Mongols, failing to respect the environment wasn't just bad form, it was an invitation for cosmic retribution. So we have these two immense, almost impersonal forces, the sky and the earth, governing the grand sweep of existence. But how did an ordinary Mongol interact with them on a daily basis? How did you bridge the gap between your small felt tent and the infinite sky? Well, that's where the next, more intimate layer of their spiritual world comes in, the realm of spirits. The Mongol world was teeming with spirits. They weren't ghosts in the spooky Halloween sense. They were the invisible forces, the animating principles that inhabited everything. Every mountain had its master spirit. Every river had its guardian. A particularly large and ancient tree was not just wood, it was the home of a powerful entity. When a Mongol tribe moved into a new valley, one of the first things they would do is make offerings to the local spirits, the Gazareen Ezan or Masters of the Land. It was like introducing yourself to your new neighbors. You showed respect, you asked for their blessing, and you promised not to cause trouble. You might leave a small offering of milk, or tie a blue silk scarf, to a stone cairn called an ovu. These ovus, which you can still see all over Mongolia today, are like spiritual sign-in sheets, markers of a place where the human and spirit worlds intersect. This belief system fostered a profound awareness of one's surroundings. A hunter wouldn't just kill an animal, he would often ask its spirit for forgiveness, explaining that his family needed to eat. He saw the animal not as a mere resource, but as a fellow being participating in the great cycle of life and death, a cycle overseen by the spirits of the forest. Crossing a major river was a significant event. You would make an offering before you entered the water, acknowledging the power of the river's spirit and asking for safe passage. This wasn't superstition in the way we think of it. It was a practical code of conduct for living in a world that was very much alive, a world where every element had agency and required respect. Most important of all, however, were the ancestral spirits. For the Mongols, death was not an end, it was a transition. When a person died, their soul didn't just vanish or go to some distant, abstract heaven. Their spirit remained a powerful and active member of the family and the clan. Your ancestors were, in essence, the celestial board of directors for your lineage. They watched over you, offered guidance, and could intercede on your behalf with the more powerful spirits, and even Tengri himself. They had a vested interest in your success, because your success and the continuation of the family line was their legacy. This is why lineage was so incredibly important. Genghis Khan could trace his ancestry back to a mythical blue-grey wolf and a fallow doe, divine beings who represented the union of the sky and the earth. He wasn't just a man, he was the current manifestation of a sacred and powerful bloodline. Every Mongol family felt this connection to their past. The primary way of interacting with these ancestral spirits was through *ongon. An ongon was a physical object, often a small felt or leather doll, a carved piece of wood or a drawing, that served as a vessel for an ancestral spirit to inhabit. These weren't idols to be worshipped, they were more like telephones to the spirit world. The ongon were kept in a place of honor within the jur, usually opposite the door. Before every meal, the family would make a small offering to them, smearing a bit of fat or dripping a bit of milk onto the ongon. This wasn't a transaction, it was an act of inclusion. It was saying, "Grandfather, grandmother, you are still part of this family. We honor you, and we invite you to share in our good fortune." This constant, daily interaction with the spirits of the dead created a powerful sense of continuity. You were never truly alone. You were part of a long, unbroken chain stretching back into the mists of time, and you hoped, stretching forward into the future through your children. Your actions weren't just for you, they reflected on your entire lineage, living and dead. This added an immense weight to concepts like honor and loyalty. To betray your clan wasn't just a personal failing, it was a deep insult to the generations of ancestors who were watching over you. They might withdraw their protection, leaving you vulnerable to misfortune, sickness, and spiritual attack. So you have this complex spiritual ecosystem, the great powers of sky and earth, the countless local nature spirits, and the ever-present council of ancestors. It's a lot to keep track of. If you get sick, is it because you offended a river spirit, or because your great-grandfather is displeased with you? If your horses are dying, is it a sign that Tengri is withdrawing his favor, or did you accidentally stumble upon a sacred place without showing proper respect? How do you diagnose a spiritual problem? You don't. You call in a professional, and in the Mongol world, that professional was the shaman, the form bow. The shaman was the human bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. He, or sometimes she, as there were female shamans known as Wodgan, was not a priest. A priest is a functionary of a religious institution. He follows dogma, reads from a holy book, and acts as an intermediary for a god that is accessible to all. The shaman's role was fundamentally different. He was a technician of the sacred, a spiritual diagnostician, a cosmic repairman. His authority didn't come from a book or an institution. It came from his direct, personal, and often harrowing experiences with the spirit world. You didn't decide to become a shaman, you were chosen. The calling often came in the form of what was known as the shamanic sickness. A young person might fall into a long, mysterious illness, have vivid, terrifying dreams, or start acting erratically, as if possessed. From a modern medical perspective, it might look like a psychological crisis or a neurological disorder. But in the Mongol worldview, it was a sign that the spirits had selected this person and were breaking them down in order to remake them. An older, established shaman would be called in to diagnose the situation. If it was a genuine calling, the young person would be taken on as an apprentice to learn the trade, the songs, the drum rhythms, the names of the spirits, the techniques for navigating the treacherous terrain of the spirit world. The central act of the shaman was the spirit journey. To perform a healing or a divination, the shaman needed to leave his body and travel into the other realms to find the source of the problem. This was accomplished through a trance, induced by the rhythmic, hypnotic beat of a drum, chanting, and sometimes dancing. Picture it. You are inside a smoky, dimly lit jur. The shaman is dressed in his ritual costume, which is a spectacle in itself. It might be adorned with metal mirrors to deflect evil spirits, feathers from powerful birds like eagles or owls, and strips of cloth in various colours. It wasn't just a costume, it was a suit of spiritual armour and a map of the cosmos. He begins to beat his drum. The rhythm starts slowly, a steady heartbeat. He begins to chant, his voice low and guttural. As the drumming gets faster and louder, his chanting changes, becoming a strange chorus of animal cries, whispers and shouts. He is calling his spirit helpers, the souls of animals, the ghosts of his shaman ancestors, to aid him on his journey. His body might twitch and shake. He is no longer fully present in the jur. He is on the edge, one foot in this world, one in the other. Then, with a final convulsive shudder, he's gone. His body might slump or continue to move on its own, but his consciousness is now flying through the spirit world. He is searching for the cause of the illness, perhaps a soul that has been stolen by a malevolent spirit, which he must now fight to retrieve, or he is journeying to the Council of Ancestors to ask for guidance, or he is flying up to the realm of Tengri to interpret the sky's will for the tribe's Khan. When he returns, often exhausted and drenched in sweat, he brings back the answer. The illness is because someone unknowingly chopped wood from a sacred tree. An offering must be made. The lost horses strayed into the territory of a mountain spirit. They must be appeased. The Khan is planning a raid. The ancestors approve, but only if he attacks from the east. The shaman was therefore a doctor, a therapist, a fortune teller, and a crucial political advisor all rolled into one. When Genghis Khan was still the young Temujin unifying the tribes, he relied heavily on the counsel of a powerful shaman named Usun Ebugen. The shaman's visions and pronouncements gave Temujin's actions a stamp of divine approval, helping to legitimize his rapidly growing power. The shaman was the one who could confirm that yes, Temujin's favor was indeed with this young upstart. However, this power could also be a threat. The most famous example is the story of Kokachu, also known as Teb Tengri, which means most heavenly. He was the son of the shaman who had been close to Genghis Khan's father. As Genghis consolidated his power, Teb Tengri's own influence grew immensely. He became the most powerful shaman in the Mongol nation, with a massive following. He could, with a single pronouncement, declare that Tengri's favor had shifted, and for a while, he and Genghis Khan worked together. It was Teb Tengri who, in a grand ceremony in 1206, officially proclaimed Temujin as Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, by the will of the eternal sky. But then, Teb Tengri overstepped. His ambition grew, and he began to challenge the authority of Genghis Khan's own family, particularly his brothers. He instigated rivalries and used his spiritual authority to gather political power for himself. There was a confrontation. Teb Tengri and his followers publicly humiliated one of Genghis's brothers. This was a direct challenge Genghis could not ignore. He was now faced with a fundamental question: who truly spoke for the eternal sky? The Khan chosen by Tengri, or the shaman who claimed to be its messenger? Genghis Khan made his choice. He arranged a meeting, a wrestling match with Teb Tengri. In a carefully orchestrated move inside the Khan's jur, his loyal men seized the shaman, dragged him outside, and broke his back. The traditional way of executing someone of high status without spilling blood on the earth. The message was brutally clear. While the spirit world was real, and shamans were its necessary intermediaries, the ultimate authority on earth, the final interpreter of Tengri's will for the nation, was the Khan himself. Genghis Khan had effectively nationalized the religion. He cut out the middleman. From that point on, the Mongol state's ideology was clear. The great Khan speaks for Tengri. His will asterisk is asterisk Tengri's will. It was a masterstroke of political and spiritual consolidation, and it laid the final piece of ideological groundwork for the empire to come. This worldview, this entire spiritual framework, was woven into the fabric of daily life through a complex web of rituals and taboos. These weren't just arbitrary rules. They were the practical application of their cosmology, a kind of spiritual grammar for how to live correctly in a world animated by powerful forces. Let's start with birth. When a child was born, they weren't just a new person, they were a reincarnated soul, a new link in the ancestral chain. The placenta was often buried near the hearth of the family jur, tying the child's spirit to the home and to the Earth Mother. Etigen, the child's first solid food, first haircut, and first time mounting a horse were all marked by small family rituals, celebrating their integration into the community and their growing connection to the Mongol way of life. Names were chosen carefully, sometimes with the help of a shaman, to reflect the child's destiny or to honor a powerful ancestor. Daily life inside the jur, the Mongol home, was governed by a subtle etiquette designed to maintain spiritual harmony. The threshold, for example, was considered a sacred space, a boundary between the domestic world of the family and the wild world outside. It was a grave insult to step on the threshold of someone's jur. To do so was to symbolically crush the neck of the head of the household. Foreign envoys who were unaware of this custom would often cause deep offense, and it's mentioned in several historical accounts. It wasn't just about being clumsy, it was a spiritual faux pas. Inside the jur, the space was organized according to a cosmic map. The back of the jur opposite the door was the most honored position, where the family altar with the ongon was kept, and where elders or honored guests would sit. The fire in the center was the sacred heart. As we've seen, you didn't throw refuse in it. You also didn't point a knife at it, as this was seen as an act of aggression against the spirit of the fire. The space was divided by gender, with the western side typically being the men's domain, associated with horses and weapons, and the eastern side being the women's, associated with cooking and dairy production. This wasn't necessarily a rigid hierarchy, but a way of creating order and balance within the microcosm of the home, mirroring the larger order of the cosmos. Even something as simple as urinating had spiritual rules. It was forbidden to relieve oneself within sight of a jur or a camp, a taboo that probably had very practical hygienic origins, but was framed in spiritual terms of purity and respect. And then there was death. The Mongol attitude towards death was remarkably pragmatic and unsentimental, at least on the surface. When someone died, their soul was believed to journey on, to rejoin the ancestors in the spirit world, which was often simply seen as a continuation of life in another form. The body, once the soul had departed, was just an empty vessel. There wasn't the same emphasis on preserving the corpse that we see in other cultures, like ancient Egypt. The funeral rites were focused on ensuring the soul's safe journey and preventing it from being troubled or from troubling the living. The burial itself, especially for a great Khan, was a matter of utmost secrecy. The Mongol belief was that the power of a great leader resided not just in his soul, but had a connection to his physical remains and his burial place. To protect this power, and to prevent enemies from desecrating the grave and stealing that power, the location had to be a complete secret. When Genghis Khan died, for example, his funeral cortege killed every person and animal they encountered on their journey back to his homeland in Mongolia, to ensure no one would know the route. After he was buried in a secret, unmarked location, 1,000 horsemen are said to have trampled the ground to obliterate any trace of the tomb. Then, the soldiers who had carried out the burial were themselves killed by another set of guards, who were in turn killed, until only a handful of people who had sworn a blood oath knew the location, and they took that secret to their graves. To this day, the tomb of Genghis Khan has never been found. It remains one of history's most enduring mysteries, a testament to the Mongol dedication to protecting the spiritual nexus of their entire nation. For common people, the rites were simpler, but still guided by the same principles. The body would be taken out into the wilderness and left for the elements and animals to consume, an air burial or sky burial. This might seem shocking to us, but it was a deeply ecological and spiritual act. The body was being returned directly to the Earth Mother, Etugen, and the Sky Father, Tengri, its elements recycled back into the great cycles of nature that had sustained it in life. It was the ultimate act of giving back. This whole system, Teorgri's will, Etsugain's embrace, the guidance of ancestors, the intervention of shamans, the daily rituals created a people who were spiritually self-sufficient, resilient, and possessed of a staggering sense of confidence. They didn't see themselves as one small nomadic people among many. They saw themselves as the chosen people of the eternal blue sky. And this is the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. This is how a nature-based, largely personal spiritual system became the ideological engine for world conquest. Around the time of Genghis Khan, a powerful idea took hold. The belief was that just as there is only one sun in the sky, and one eternal sky, Tengri, that rules the cosmos, there should only be one ruler on earth. The world, in its natural divinely ordained state, was meant to be unified under a single Khan, who ruled with Tengri's blessing. All the division, all the warring kingdoms and fractured empires, this was an unnatural state of affairs. It was a cosmic imbalance that needed to be corrected. And who had Tengri chosen to correct it? The Mongols, under their great Khan. This was their divine mandate. The conquests were not just about greed or power, though those were certainly factors. On a deeper ideological level, they were fulfilling a sacred duty. They were on a mission from God, or rather from the sky itself. When Genghis Khan sent letters to other rulers like the Shah of the Khwarezmian Empire, The letters would often begin with a phrase like, "By the power of the eternal sky, the decree of the oceanic Khan." He wasn't presenting himself as a mere king, he was presenting himself as an agent of cosmic destiny. This belief had a number of staggering psychological effects. First, it gave the individual Mongol warrior an incredible sense of purpose and a lack of fear. If you were killed in a battle fighting for the great Khan, you were dying in service to the will of Tengri. Your death had meaning. Your soul would be honored by your ancestors, who would welcome you into their ranks with pride. This made the Mongol armies notoriously fearless and relentless. Second, it provided a powerful justification for their actions. The destruction and death they caused, which was often immense, could be framed as a necessary, if harsh, part of the process of restoring cosmic order. Cities that resisted were defying the will of heaven itself, and their obliteration was a consequence of that spiritual rebellion. Cities that submitted, however, were welcomed into the new world order. This leads to the third and perhaps most brilliant aspect of their worldview, a built-in policy of religious tolerance. Because Tengrism was not a proselytizing religion with a book of scripture to enforce, the Mongols genuinely did not care what gods their conquered subjects worshipped. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Jews, they could all continue to practice their faiths freely. The Mongol Khans would often patronize temples, mosques, and churches in their conquered lands. They would host debates between religious scholars from different traditions, fascinated by their various ideas about the afterlife and the divine. All the Mongols asked was that, whatever god you prayed to, you also acknowledged that the ultimate authority on earth, the great Khan, was put there by the will of the eternal sky, Tengri. You had to pay your taxes and obey the law of the Khan. Your spiritual life was your own business. In an age of brutal religious warfare from the Crusades to jihads, this was a revolutionary and deeply pragmatic policy. It meant they didn't have to waste time and resources trying to convert populations. They simply absorbed them. A Nestorian Christian or a Persian Muslim could serve in the Khan's administration without any conflict of interest. As long as they accepted his divinely ordained political authority, it was a model of spiritually backed secular governance that allowed them to manage a vast, multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire with surprising efficiency. Their worldview, born in the vast, empty spaces of the steppe, turned out to be the perfect ideological tool for an empire. It was universal without being exclusive. It was absolute in its claims to authority, but flexible in its application. It gave the Mongols themselves a core of unshakable belief in their own destiny, while allowing their subjects to maintain their own cultural and spiritual identities. The eternal blue sky was not just a weather pattern, it was a political theory. The Earth Mother was not just soil, she was the foundation of their ethical code. The ancestors were not just memories, they were an active advisory board, and the shaman was not just a mystic, he was the first line of communication in a world where the veil between the physical and the spiritual was thin and constantly being crossed. This was the spiritual engine that drove the Mongol horde. It was a belief system perfectly adapted to their environment, and when they exploded out of that environment, it proved to be just as ruthlessly effective at conquering the world as their composite bow and their peerless horsemanship. The machine was running, and its fuel was the very sky above. But a machine, even one fueled by the eternal blue sky, is only as good as its smallest, most essential cog. And in the Mongol world, that fundamental component wasn't a gear or a piston. It was a human being. The Mongol military wasn't an army that was recruited. It was a people that were an army. There was no basic training in the way we'd understand it. No drill sergeants shouting at nervous teenagers to drop and give them 20. The training began the moment a child could sit up on their own, and it never, ever stopped. It was a life forged in the saddle, under that very same sky that gave them their purpose. To understand the Mongol warrior, you don't look to a barracks or a training field, you look to the cradle. Chapter 5. Forged in the Saddle. The Making of the Mongol Warrior. Let's just take a moment and consider modern parenting. The constant low-level hum of anxiety. Is my child getting enough screen time? Too much screen time? Are they eating organic? Are their playdates stimulating their socio-emotional development? It's exhausting. The Mongol approach to child rearing was, we might politely say, a little more hands-off. Or perhaps more accurately, it was hands-on in a way that would send a modern social worker into a state of catatonic shock. A Mongol child's first real interaction with the world outside the asterisk was with a horse, not looking at one from a distance, not a gentle pony ride at a county fair. We're talking about an intimate, lifelong partnership that began in toddlerhood. Accounts from observers like Giovanni da Pian del Carpin, a Franciscan friar who travelled to the Mongol Empire in the 1240s, are fairly clear on this. At the age of 2 or 3, a child was placed on a horse. Often their legs were literally tied together beneath the horse's belly to keep them from tumbling off. Their mother would ride alongside, holding the reins, until the child got the feel for the animal's rhythm, the constant sway and roll that would become as natural to them as walking. Imagine this. Before your memories have even really started to solidify, the world is viewed from 4 feet off the ground, moving at the pace of a trotting horse. The horizon isn't a fixed line, it's a bobbing, weaving constant. The wind is always in your hair. The smell of horse sweat, leather and grass is the smell of home. While a European child was learning to navigate the treacherous terrain of a cobblestone street, a Mongol child was learning to become one with a living, breathing creature, a dozen times their own weight. There was no concept of being a pedestrian. To be a Mongol was to be equestrian. Walking was what you did when your horse needed a rest. As soon as they could hold on by themselves, they were given a bow, not a toy, a miniature but fully functional composite bow. Their first targets weren't straw dummies. They were the small creatures of the steppe, marmots, rabbits, birds. This wasn't just a game. It was a crucial contribution to the family dinner. You learned to shoot, or you went hungry. And you didn't learn to shoot from a stable, stationary position. You learned to shoot from the back of that same horse you'd been riding your whole life. Think about the level of sophisticated calculation required for this. You have to gauge the speed of your horse, the speed and direction of your target, the wind, the drop of the arrow over distance, and you have to do it all in a split second, relying on pure, ingrained instinct. Forget learning your multiplication tables. The vital math was calculating the trajectory of an arrow while your classroom is moving at 20 miles an hour. These children developed a form of hand-eye body coordination that was simply alien to the settled agricultural peoples they would one day conquer. While a young European squire was learning the footwork of swordplay on a flat, predictable patch of ground, a 5-year-old Mongol was mastering the art of hitting a moving target from a moving platform. The two skill sets aren't even in the same universe. Their games were training. Wrestling was a universal pastime, building incredible core strength and resilience. Every boy, and many girls, grew up wrestling. It wasn't about elaborate techniques. It was about raw, functional power, about learning how to use leverage and balance. It's the kind of strength you develop from a life of hard physical work, not from a curated gym routine. They would have races on horseback, of course, pushing their ponies to their limits, learning the fine art of controlling an animal at a full gallop. These weren't just playful contests. They were brutal lessons in endurance and risk assessment. A fall could mean a broken bone, and a broken bone on the steppe, far from any kind of formal medical care, was a very serious proposition. You learned not to fall. So by the time a Mongol boy reached his early teens, he wasn't a recruit. He was a finished product. He was a veteran of 1,000 hunts, a master of his horse, and an archer of terrifying proficiency. He had been living and breathing the core skills of the Mongol military his entire life. There was no transition from civilian to soldier. The words were meaningless. He was simply a Mongol, and to be a Mongol was to be a warrior. It was the most brutally effective, all-encompassing military academy on Earth, and the curriculum was simply survival. Tom? Asterisk. Asterisk. The engine of empire. The Mongol horse. Asterisk. Asterisk. Now, we can't talk about the warrior without talking about his most essential piece of kit, and it wasn't a sword or a bow or a suit of armor. It was his horse, or more accurately, his horses, plural. If you have a picture in your head of a Mongol warrior's steed, you might be imagining a tall, noble, fiery Arabian stallion. You would be completely wrong. The Mongol horse was, well, it was the opposite of that. It was small, stout, and famously scruffy. It had a big head, short legs, and a perpetually unimpressed expression. It looked less like a noble warhorse and more like a stubborn pony that had seen better days, but to judge it on its looks would be a fatal mistake. This horse was the four-wheel drive, all-terrain, biofueled pickup truck of the 13th century. It was, arguably, the single most important piece of technology the Mongols possessed. Its genius lay not in its speed, though it was quick, but in its unbelievable endurance and self-sufficiency. This wasn't a pampered, grain-fed animal that needed a warm stable every night. The Mongol horse was a product of the same harsh environment as the Mongols themselves. It could survive on whatever sparse grass it could find, even pouring through snow in the dead of winter to get at the frozen vegetation beneath. It had a legendary tolerance for extreme temperatures, from the scorching summers to the soul-crushing winters of the steppe. In a pinch, it could go for days with little food or water. This resilience was the secret to the famous speed and reach of the Mongol armies. An infantry army, the standard of the day in Europe and China, is limited by the speed of a walking man, maybe 10-15 miles on a good day. A traditional cavalry army was faster, but it was tethered to a massive supply train of fodder for its horses. The Mongol horse, was its own supply train. It fueled itself off the land it was crossing. But the real masterstroke, the logistical innovation that shattered every military convention of the time, was the remount system. Every single Mongol warrior went to war with a string of horses, typically 3 to 5 of them. He would ride one until it began to tire. Then, without ever stopping, he would leap from its back onto a fresh horse. He'd do this multiple times a day. This meant that while the warrior himself might be in the saddle for 10 or 12 hours, each individual horse was only being ridden for a fraction of that time. They could cover incredible distances, sometimes up to 80 or 100 miles in a single day for days on end. To put that in perspective, the Pony Express in 19th century America, which was considered the absolute pinnacle of rapid horse-based communication, averaged about 75 miles a day. The Mongols did this, not with single riders, but with entire armies. They moved with a speed that their enemies literally could not comprehend. Scouts would report a Mongol army was a week's march away, only for that army to appear on the horizon the next morning, ready for battle. It was disorienting, terrifying, and seemed like a kind of dark magic, but it wasn't magic. It was the simple, brutal efficiency of a scruffy horse, and a system designed to maximize its incredible stamina. This partnership went beyond mere logistics. The horse was a source of life. The Mongols drank its milk, which they fermented into a potent, sour, slightly alcoholic beverage called *air, axusk or *kumis, *. This was their staple drink. It was a vital source of vitamins and probiotics in a diet that was otherwise almost exclusively meat and dairy. It was their energy drink, their social lubricant, and their medicine. And in the most desperate of circumstances, a warrior could open a vein in his horse's neck, drink a small amount of blood to sustain himself, and then seal the wound, all without permanently harming the animal. This is a level of intimacy and codependence that's hard for us to grasp. The horse wasn't just a tool, it was a mobile pantry, a water source, and a lifeline. It was a brother in arms. The Mongol warrior loved his horse, not with the sentimentality we might feel for a pet, but with the deep, pragmatic respect one has for a partner upon whom one's own life utterly depends. Front Asterisk, the interface, the revolutionary saddle, asterisk. So you have this incredibly skilled rider and this astonishingly tough horse, but there's a crucial piece of technology that connects them, that turns them from a man on an animal into a single, cohesive fighting unit, and that is the Mongol saddle. It might not sound as exciting as a sword or a bow, but the Mongol saddle was a masterpiece of engineering that was as vital to their success as anything else. To understand why, you have to understand what it's like to ride a horse bareback, or with a simple pad. Every jolt, every bounce of the horse's gait goes straight up your spine. You have to constantly grip with your legs just to stay on. Your hands are occupied with holding the reins and balancing. Firing a bow accurately under these conditions is next to impossible. You are essentially just a passenger. The Mongol saddle changed all of that. It was built on a sturdy wooden frame, and it had two revolutionary features: a high pommel at the front and a high cantle at the back. In essence, it created a deep, secure bucket seat. When a rider sat in this saddle, he was wedged in. He wasn't perched on top of the horse. He was locked into the horse's back. This provided immense stability. A sudden swerve, a quick stop, the recoil of a powerful bow shot. The saddle absorbed the shock and kept the rider securely in place. It turned the rider from a passenger into a pilot. But the real game changer, an innovation the Mongols perfected, was the use of effective stirrups. Stirrups had been around in various forms for a while, but the Mongols integrated them into their riding system in a way that was transformative. Their stirrups were relatively short, which allowed the rider to stand up in the saddle, flexing his knees to absorb the horse's motion, much like a modern skier handles Mongols. This simple act of standing changed everything. First, it created an incredibly stable firing platform. A Mongol archer could stand in his stirrups, isolating his upper body from the movement of the horse below. He could twist at the waist, aim and fire in any direction, front, side, or even directly behind him, with a level of accuracy that was simply impossible for a rider who was bouncing in his seat. The saddle held him in place, and the stirrups gave him a solid base. His legs and core were doing the riding. His arms and torso were free to fight. Second, it was a massive boon to endurance. Riding for hours on end is punishing on the lower back and legs. Being able to stand up, shift your weight, and change your position in the saddle made it possible to ride for those incredible distances we talked about. It was the 13th century equivalent of an ergonomic chair, designed not for office comfort, a concept they would have found hilarious, but for maximum efficiency in a life spent almost entirely on horseback. This combination, the deep seat and the functional stirrups, was the critical interface. It allowed the warrior to become a human turret on a mobile weapons platform. It freed his hands for the weapon that truly defined Mongol warfare, the composite bow. The saddle was the quiet, unsung hero of the Mongol conquest. It didn't look like much, just a construction of wood, leather, and felt. But it was the piece of technology that unlocked the full potential of both the peerless Mongol horseman and his devastating bow. It was the linchpin that held the entire system together. The weapon of choice, the composite bow, If the horse was the engine and the saddle was the interface, then the composite bow was the main cannon. The sound that struck terror into the hearts of soldiers from China to Poland was not the roar of a catapult, but the whistle of a Mongol arrow, and the weapon that launched it was a technological marvel. The typical European bow of the era, like the famous English longbow, was what's called a self-bow. It was made from a single, well-chosen piece of wood, usually yew. It was powerful, effective, and relatively simple to make. The Mongol bow was none of those things. It was a complex, laminated piece of military hardware, painstakingly assembled from multiple materials over the course of a year or more. Its construction was a form of alchemy. The core was typically wood or bamboo, providing the basic shape. On the belly of the bow, the side facing the archer, a layer of animal horn, often from a water buffalo or ibex, was glued on. Horn is incredibly resistant to compression. On the back of the bow, the side facing the target, was a layer of sinew, the tendons from the legs and back of animals like deer or cattle, all bound together with a hideously effective glue made from fish bladders. Sinew is incredibly resistant to being stretched. So when a Mongol archer drew this bow, he was performing a miracle of potential energy. The horn on the belly was desperately trying to resist being compressed, while the sinew on the back was desperately trying to resist being stretched. The wooden core held it all together. The entire bow was like a tightly coiled spring, storing a phenomenal amount of power in a very small, compact package. This design had two huge advantages. First, it was incredibly powerful. A Mongol bow could have a draw weight of well over 100 pounds, sometimes as high as 160 pounds. It could shoot an arrow with enough force to pierce the mail armor, common among European and Middle Eastern armies, at a considerable distance. Its effective range was over 300 yards, far exceeding that of most contemporary bows. The Mongols engaged their enemies from a distance, raining down arrows with terrifying accuracy long before their opponent's weapons were in range. Second, and just as importantly, it was compact. A typical English longbow was as tall as a man. It was unwieldy and absolutely impossible to use from horseback. The Mongol bow was recurved, its tips curved away from the archer, which allowed it to be much shorter while retaining its power. It was the perfect cavalry weapon, short enough to be handled easily on a moving horse, but with the punch of a much larger weapon. The Mongols used a variety of arrows, depending on the target. They had heavy, broad-head arrows for close-range shots against armored opponents, designed to punch through steel and cause massive trauma. They had lighter arrows for long-range volleys, and they had a particularly nasty invention, the whistling arrow. This was an arrowhead carved with holes, which caused it to scream through the air as it flew. An army facing a volley of these would be subjected to a terrifying, nerve-shredding shriek just before the lethal arrows began to fall among them. It was a brilliant piece of psychological warfare, designed to break an enemy's morale before the real killing even began. The technique for firing this weapon was also unique. European archers typically used 2 or 3 fingers to draw the bowstring. The Mongols used a thumb draw. They would hook their thumb around the string, protecting it with a small ring of jade, stone or leather, and lock the thumb in place with their index and middle fingers. This method allowed for a cleaner, faster release of the string, which translated to a more accurate and powerful shot. It was a small detail, but in a world where tiny advantages could mean the difference between life and death, it mattered. And of course they could do all of this from the saddle, at a gallop. The most famous and most feared Mongol tactic was the asterisk Parthian shot. Asterisk, a unit of Mongol horse archers would charge towards an enemy line, firing arrows as they came. Just as they reached the effective range of the enemy's own archers or infantry, they would suddenly wheel their horses around and pretend to flee. An inexperienced, undisciplined enemy would often see this as a rout and charge after them in a disorganized mob. This was exactly what the Mongols wanted. As they fled, the Mongol warriors would rise in their stirrups, twist their bodies completely around, and fire a volley of arrows back at their pursuers. Imagine the discipline and skill required to pull this off. You are controlling a galloping horse with your legs, looking over your shoulder, and firing a 120-pound draw bow with deadly accuracy. It's an act of almost superhuman coordination, and for the pursuing army, it was a nightmare. They were charging into a hail of arrows, unable to effectively fight back, their own formation dissolving into chaos with every step. The feigned retreat was the ultimate trap, a perfect synthesis of horsemanship, technology, and tactical genius. It was made possible by the scruffy horse, the secure saddle, and the compact, devastating power of the composite bow. Pines died rotten. Asterisk. Asterisk. The final exam, the Great Hunt, or Nurgo. So we have the warrior, trained from birth. We have his horse, his saddle, and his bow. But how were all these individual components forged into a cohesive, disciplined, and unstoppable army? The answer lies in an event that was, on the surface, a hunt. But the Mongol Great Hunt, the Ask-Nurg asterisk, was something far more. It was a logistical exercise, a communications drill, and a full-dress rehearsal for war, all rolled into one. And the final exam had a venison buffet at the end. The Ask-Nurg was traditionally held in the winter, when the lack of foliage made spotting game easier. It was a massive undertaking, decreed by the Khan himself. Thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of Mongols would participate. It would begin with a huge line of horsemen, called a cordon, stretching for miles and miles across the steppe. On a signal, this line would begin to move forward. The objective was not to kill the animals. Not yet. The objective was to drive every living creature, deer, wolves, boar, whatever was in their path ahead of them. This required unbelievable coordination and discipline. The line had to move at the same speed, without creating any gaps. If a horseman let an animal slip through his section of the line, the punishment was severe. This wasn't a casual affair. It was a deadly serious military operation. Communication was handled not by voice, but by a complex system of flags, hand signals, and messengers who would ride at full tilt along the line, relaying orders. For weeks, sometimes even months, this vast human net would slowly, inexorably close. The riders would eat and sleep in the saddle, their focus absolute. They were learning to work as a single, unified organism over a vast geographical area. They were practicing the art of encirclement on a continental scale. As the circle tightened, the tension grew. The enclosed area would become a churning mass of terrified animals. The discipline required to hold the line now was immense. The final stages were a carefully controlled slaughter, with the Khan and his chief commanders often taking the first shots, followed by the other warriors, who would practice their archery on the trapped and panicked game. Now, substitute a herd of deer for the army of the Khwarezmian Shah. Substitute a patch of Mongolian steppe for the plains of Hungary. The principle is exactly the same. The *nerge. Taught every single Mongol warrior his place in the larger machine. It taught them patience, forcing them to hold a position for weeks on end. It taught them communication, how to read signals and follow complex orders without question. And most importantly, it taught them the tactic that would become their hallmark, the encirclement. On the battlefield, Mongol armies would often refuse to engage in a head-on clash. They would use their superior mobility to flow around the flanks of a slower, heavier enemy. Wings of cavalry would extend out, just like the cordon of the *nerge, until they had completely surrounded their foe. The enemy army would find itself trapped, cut off from supplies and reinforcements, with arrows raining down on them from every direction. The panic and despair of the animals in the final stages of the *nerge was precisely the psychological state the Mongols aimed to create in their human enemies. The *nergereist was the ultimate practical application of every skill a Mongol possessed. It required the endurance of the horses and the horsemanship of the riders to maintain the cordon. It required the devastating power of the bow in its final bloody stages, and it required a level of collective discipline that no other army in the world could match. It was a hunt, a ritual, and a training exercise all at once. It took the individual, self-sufficient warrior forged in the saddle since childhood, and taught him how to function as a single lethal cell in the body of the horde. It was the final brutal lesson in an education that had begun in the cradle, and its final exam was the conquest of the known world. Chapter 6. The Unifier. How Temujin weaponized a way of life. But that was the end result, the final terrifying product. Before the world-conquering machine could be unleashed, it had to be built. And the man who built it, the chief architect of this new world order, was a man named Temujin, and his genius was not in inventing a new way for his people to live, but in taking the life they already knew, the chaos, the resilience, the ruthless self-sufficiency of the steppe, and giving it a single terrifying purpose. He didn't create a new fire. He took the 1,000 scattered embers of the Mongol tribes and forged them in a furnace of his own design. He weaponized a way of life. To understand what Temujin, who the world would come to know as Genghis Khan, truly accomplished, we have to first understand the world he was born into. And we must be clear, it was, for lack of a better term, an absolute mess. The Mongolian steppe in the 12th century wasn't a nation. It wasn't even a loose confederation of friendly cousins who occasionally got together for holidays. It was a brutal, chaotic free-for-all, a perpetual cycle of raid, counter-raid, betrayal, and blood feud. Imagine your entire world is one vast rolling sea of grass under an endless sky. There are no walls, no borders, no police force. Your closest neighbor might be a day's ride away, and whether they are a friend, a distant relative, or someone who wants to steal your sheep and your wife, depends entirely on the season, the weather, and what their grandfather did to your grandfather 50 years ago. Loyalty was a fragile, slippery thing, extended only to your immediate family, and then perhaps to your clan. But even that was conditional. The primary social currency was strength. The primary mode of interaction was violence. Alliances were made to be broken, and the only law was that of the stronger. It was a world that produced incredibly tough, self-reliant people. It had to. Weakness was a death sentence. But it was also a world that was constantly consuming itself. The incredible energy of the steppe peoples was being expended entirely on fighting each other. This was the raw material Temujin had to work with. A population of the toughest individuals on the planet, who also happened to be the most fractious, disorganized, and mutually hostile. His father, a minor clan chieftain, was poisoned by a rival tribe. His own clan then abandoned him, his mother, and his siblings, leaving them to die on the empty steppe. He was hunted, enslaved, and betrayed by his closest allies. He experienced in the most visceral and personal way the utter dysfunction of his world, and it was in surviving this brutal education that he formulated his revolutionary idea, an idea so simple on its surface, yet so profound in its implications that it would shatter the old world forever. The problem, he realized, wasn't the people. The problem was the system. The very concept of the clan, the tribe, the institutions that were meant to provide safety and identity, were in fact the very source of the endless self-defeating chaos. So he decided to break them. This is where the story shifts from a simple tale of a warrior unifying his people to a masterclass in social and military engineering. Temujin's first and most crucial reform was what historians now call the decimal system. And if that sounds like something from a dry mathematics textbook, you've been wonderfully misled. This was not about numbers. It was about reprogramming the soul of a nation. Before Temujin, a Mongol army was just a gathering of clans. A man rode to war alongside his brothers, his cousins, his father, all under the banner of their clan chief. Their loyalty was to their family, their clan, and their chief, in that order. If their chief decided to switch sides in the middle of a battle for a better offer, the entire contingent would follow him. If a rival clan in the same army showed a moment of weakness, it wasn't unheard of to settle an old score right there on the battlefield. You think your office politics are bad? Imagine if Brenda from accounting could literally ride you down with a lance because you took the last donut. It was hopelessly inefficient and utterly unreliable. Temujin's solution was elegantly brutal. After a series of hard-fought victories where he united or conquered the major tribes, the Karites, the Naimans, the Merkits, his own Mongol people, he held a great assembly, Kurultai, in 1206. Here he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, the oceanic ruler, the universal leader of all the people of the felt-walled tents. And then he dropped the bombshell. He took all the fighting men of all the tribes, jumbled them up, and reorganized them into new units based on the power of 10. The smallest unit was the Arban, a group of 10 men. These 10 men were declared to be brothers. They were responsible for each other. If one man deserted, all 10 were executed. If one man showed incredible bravery, all 10 might be rewarded. Above the Arban, was the Zuan a company of 100 men, made up of 10 Arbans. Then came the Mingan a regiment of 1,000 men, composed of 10 Zuans and finally, the largest operational unit, the Tumen 10,000 warriors, a river of men and horses, a self-contained engine of conquest. Now, here's the genius. When he created these units, he deliberately painstakingly broke up the old clans. A man from the proud and powerful Karite tribe might find himself in an Arban with 2 Naimans, who were his hereditary enemies just a few months before. He'd be alongside a couple of Tatars, the very people who had poisoned his new Khan's father. There would be a man from a lowly, insignificant clan he'd never even heard of, and maybe 1 or 2 from his own original tribe, just to make it interesting. And the commander of this new 10-man unit, he wasn't chosen because his father was important. He was chosen by his Mingan or Tumen commander, because he was the most capable warrior among them. Think about the psychological impact of this. Overnight, everything you knew was gone. Your entire identity had been wrapped up in your kinship group. Your clan, that was your safety net, your social circle, your past and your future. Now it was irrelevant. Your new family was this motley crew of 9 other strangers. Your survival was now inextricably linked to theirs. The old blood feud you had with the Naiman standing next to you was suddenly, profoundly suicidal. To act on it would be to condemn yourself and your other 8 new brothers to death. The old loyalty to your clan chief was now treason. Your loyalty was to your Arban leader, your Zun leader, your Mingan leader, and ultimately, to the one man at the top of the pyramid, Genghis Khan himself. It was a corporate merger from hell and a stroke of sociological genius. He didn't just build an army, he forged a new people. He used the structure of the military to create a national identity where none had existed before. These men, who had spent their lives learning to trust only their own blood, were now forced to build new bonds of trust based on shared experience, shared danger, and shared discipline. They ate together, slept together, fought together, and, if necessary, died together. Within a generation, a man would be more likely to identify himself by his Mingan than by his ancestral clan. The old divisions were quite literally bled out of them on the battlefield, replaced by a singular, unified identity. They were all Mongols, warriors of the Great Khan. This system also created a level of discipline and tactical flexibility that was simply unheard of in the 13th century. A feudal European army was a clumsy, top-heavy affair. Knights answered only to their lord, and that lord might ignore the king if he felt slighted. Orders were suggestions, and cohesive action was a minor miracle. The Mongol army, by contrast, was a finely tuned instrument. A commander of **** could give a complex order, and it would be relayed down the chain of command from the commander of 1,000 to the commander of 100 to the commander of 10, and executed with terrifying precision. They could perform complex maneuvers, the feigned retreat, the pincer movement, the flanking attack, with tens of thousands of men across miles of terrain, all communicating through signal flags, horns, and whistling arrows. They moved less like an army and more like a single organism, a predator of immense size and terrifying intelligence, and it was all built on that simple foundational unit of 10 men, torn from their past and bound together by a new, unbreakable code of loyalty. So you have this new, perfectly organized army. Everyone knows who they report to, and the old messy allegiances have been sandblasted away. But an army is still just a collection of people, and people are prone to, well, being people. They get greedy, they get lazy, they hold grudges, they steal from each other. How do you ensure this new national unity doesn't just crumble back into the old chaos the moment your back is turned? You need a new set of rules, a single universal law that governs everyone, from the lowest horsegroom to the Khan's own sons. You need a new operating system for your empire, and Temujin called his the Great Yasa. Now, the Yasa is one of history's more mysterious legal codes. There was probably no single beautifully bound book titled the Yasa for Dummies. It was likely a collection of decrees, traditions, and judgments issued by Genghis Khan throughout his life, compiled and codified by his followers. It wasn't written down for the common man to read. Most Mongols were illiterate anyway. It was a body of law that was known, proclaimed, and ruthlessly enforced. And its primary objective was not fairness or justice in the modern sense. Its primary objective was order, the absolute, unwavering order necessary to keep the Mongol war machine running smoothly. The Yasa took the existing customs of the steppe nomads, some good, some brutal, and formalized them with the full, terrifying weight of the state. Many of its laws were just good, common sense for a nomadic society. For instance, it was forbidden to pollute rivers or springs. This wasn't an early environmentalist movement. It was a practical matter of public health. In a dry landscape where water sources were few and far between, a fouled spring could sicken an entire camp and their herds. So you didn't wash your dirty clothes directly in the river, and you certainly didn't relieve yourself in it. The punishment for doing so was, as with most things in the Yasa, death. Hospitality, a sacred tradition on the steppe, was also codified. Any traveller passing through a region had to be given food and shelter. This wasn't just about being nice. This was crucial for the movement of messengers, envoys, and merchants across the vast, sparsely populated empire. It was a law that made communication and commerce possible. To deny a traveller hospitality was a crime against the state. But it was in the laws concerning property and loyalty that the Yasa showed its true, hard-as-steel purpose. Before Genghis Khan, the most common pastime on the steppe was animal theft. Raiding your neighbour's herds was practically the national sport. The Yasa ended that. The theft of a horse or an ox was no longer a personal dispute to be settled with a blood feud. It was a capital crime. The penalty was death. If you couldn't pay a fine, you might have to give up your children as payment. Suddenly, property was secure. A herder could sleep at night without worrying that his entire livelihood would be gone by morning. This stability was revolutionary. It freed up enormous amounts of energy that had previously been wasted on guarding one's own property and trying to steal someone else's. And then there were the laws of loyalty. Adultery was forbidden and punishable by death. Why? Because in a society where kinship was being redefined, adultery created chaos, sparking feuds and confusing bloodlines, undermining the stability of the family unit, which was the bedrock of the Arban *. Cowardice in battle was of course a death sentence. But the asterisk went further. If a warrior in an Arban * dropped his weapon or his gear during a charge, the man riding behind him was obligated to pick it up and return it to him. If he failed to do so, he was executed. This wasn't about preventing littering. It was about reinforcing the idea of absolute collective responsibility. You are responsible for your brother-in-arms in the most literal sense. His failure is your failure, and his weakness is your death. The Yasa was, in essence, martial law for an entire civilization. It was designed to stamp out every source of friction, disunity, and inefficiency that had plagued the Mongols for centuries. It regulated everything from military discipline to table manners. It decreed religious tolerance for all Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, as long as they acknowledged the supremacy of the Khan. This wasn't some enlightened policy of pluralism. It was a pragmatic recognition that religious persecution was a waste of time and energy, and that talented administrators could be found among any faith. All that mattered was that you obeyed the law and paid your taxes. The punishments of the Yasa were what we might politely call unambiguous. There was very little room for interpretation, and even less for appeal, and they were designed to be a powerful deterrent. By making the penalty for even minor theft so catastrophic, you created an environment of incredible social order. By making the penalty for disunity so final, you ensured a level of cooperation that no other society could match. The Yasa was the software that ran on the hardware of the decimal system. It was the code of conduct that turned a jumble of tribes into a disciplined, unified nation, ready for the business of conquest. It was harsh, it was brutal, but for the first time in their history, it gave the people of the steppe a sense of security and predictability. The chaos was gone, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of the Khan's law. So now you have your reorganized army and your new legal code. You've created a nation where there was none, but an empire, especially one as vast as the one Genghis Khan envisioned, cannot be run by one man alone. You need a government. You need administrators, generals, and governors you can trust absolutely. In the old world of the steppe, this was impossible. A chief might have his trusted companions, his nokers, but betrayal was always just one tempting offer away. Temujin knew this better than anyone. He needed a new system, one that would create a core of utterly devoted, highly trained, and impeccably loyal leaders to serve as the heart of his new empire. And he called this institution the Keshig*. On the surface, the Keshig* was the imperial bodyguard, but calling the Keshig* a bodyguard is like calling a modern aircraft carrier a boat. It fails to capture the sheer scale, complexity, and importance of the institution. The Keshig, in its final form, was a force of 10,000 elite warriors, Ktumen* in its own right, personally selected by the Khan, and their duties went far, far beyond just protecting his person. They were the central administration, the military academy, and the political heart of the Mongol Empire, all rolled into one. The Keshig. Was divided into 4 units. 2 of these, the day guards, Torgud*, and the night guards, Keftul*, served in shifts. When you were on duty, your life was not your own. The night guard, in particular, was an object of immense prestige and terror. They were commanded by one of the Khan's most trusted generals, and they controlled all access to the imperial camp, the Ordu*, after sunset. No one could enter or leave without their permission. They were the keepers of the Khan's sleep, and by extension, the keepers of the empire's security. To be a member of the Night Guard was to be one of the most trusted men in the world. They were also responsible for the camp's internal discipline, essentially acting as the military police. They were judge, jury, and often executioner, for any disputes or crimes within the emperor's immediate vicinity. The other components of the *Keshig included the quiver bearers, and the stewards who managed the Khan's food and drink. Again, these titles sound ceremonial, but they were positions of immense power. The chief quiver bearer was essentially a chief of staff, carrying the Khan's weapons and always at his side, privy to his every decision. The stewards who tasted his food weren't just preventing poison, they were managing the vast logistics of the imperial household. But the true genius of the Keshig lay in its function as a school for leadership. Membership was the highest honor a Mongol warrior could achieve. It wasn't just open to anyone. The Khan personally selected its members, and he drew them from the sons of his commanders, the leaders of the Mingans, and Tumans. This served two brilliant purposes at once. First, it was a system of honorable hostages. By having the son of a powerful general serving at his court, Genghis Khan ensured that general's absolute loyalty. Any thought of rebellion would mean his son's immediate death. Second, and more importantly, it was a training ground. These young men, the future leaders of the empire, grew up right at the center of power. They didn't just learn how to fight, they learned how the empire actually worked. They listened to the Khan's counsels, they watched him dispense justice, they saw how he managed logistics for a campaign, they observed the intricacies of diplomacy with foreign envoys. A young man who served 10 years in the Keshig came out not just as an elite warrior, but as a seasoned administrator and a potential general. When a new territory was conquered and a governor was needed, the Khan wouldn't just pick a random tough guy. He would choose a graduate of the Keshig, someone he knew personally, someone who had been indoctrinated in his way of thinking, and who understood the grand imperial project. The commanders of the Keshig's 4 divisions were among the most powerful men in the empire, outranking even the commanders of the regular Tumans. They were the 4 steeds, the closest companions of the Khan. In this way, the Keshig formed a loyal, meritocratic elite. It wasn't about what family you came from in the old sense. It was about whether you were good enough to be chosen and loyal enough to serve. A member of the Keshig was considered to have a higher rank than any soldier or officer outside of it. A simple bodyguard on duty could command a general in the field. This created an unshakable hierarchy with the Khan at its absolute center. Think of it as a combination of the US Secret Service, the West Point Military Academy, and the White House Cabinet Office. It was the central nervous system of the empire. Orders flowed out from it, intelligence flowed into it, and future leaders were forged within it. While the decimal system organized the body of the army, and the Yasa provided its soul, the Keshig was its brain. It was a self-perpetuating institution of excellence and loyalty, ensuring that the Khan's vision would be carried out by a cadre of men who had been hand-picked and personally groomed for the task. It was the ultimate guarantee that his revolution wouldn't die with him. So let's take a breath and survey the machine that Temujin has built. He has a unified people, forged into a disciplined army through the decimal system. He has a universal law, the Yasa, that ensures order and stability. He has a leadership incubator, the Keshig to produce a continuous supply of loyal and competent commanders and administrators. The engine of conquest is built. It is fueled, oiled, and ready to run. But there is one final, crucial piece missing. An empire, especially a nomadic one, that would eventually stretch from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe, has one fundamental enemy that is more dangerous than any army: distance. A rebellion could break out on one side of the empire, and it might take months for news to reach the Khan. By the time he could dispatch an army to deal with it, the rebellion could have festered and grown into a full-blown crisis. An envoy from a foreign king might spend a year or more just travelling to the Mongol court and back. Information is the lifeblood of any state, and in the 13th century, it moved at the speed of a horse, or more often, a slow-moving caravan. This was a critical vulnerability, and Genghis Khan's solution to this problem was perhaps his most astonishing logistical achievement: the Yam. The Yam was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first information superhighway. It was a vast, state-sponsored, continent-spanning pony express, but on an industrial scale that boggles the modern mind. It wasn't an invention out of thin air. Other empires, like the Persians, had used relay systems before, but no one, absolutely no one, had ever implemented it with such scale, efficiency, and ruthless purpose as the Mongols. The concept was simple. The Khan established a network of relay stations, or sawtooths, all across his domains. These stations were strategically placed about 20 to 30 miles apart, roughly the distance a horse could be ridden at a full gallop before needing to be replaced. Each station was a fully stocked, self-contained unit. It was staffed by local people who were required by law to maintain it. Each station had a supply of fresh horses, food, water, and lodging for the riders. It was a pit stop and a fresh ride, all in one. An official messenger of the Khan, carrying an imperial seal called a *Pisa*, could ride into a yam station at any time of day or night. The *Pisa* was a tablet of wood, silver, or gold that signified the rider's authority and the urgency of his mission. Upon seeing the *Pisa*, the station keepers would have to drop everything and immediately provide the rider with a fresh horse, food, and anything else he needed. The rider would then leap onto the new horse and gallop off to the next station, sometimes without ever touching the ground. These riders were the superheroes of their day. They were chosen for their endurance and their light weight. They would bind their torsos, heads, and limbs tightly with cloth to withstand the punishing strain of riding for days on end. They rode in all weather, through deserts and mountains, day and night. It was said that a yam rider could cover over 200 miles in a single day. Think about that. In an age when most armies were lucky to cover 20 miles a day, a message from the front lines in Persia could reach the Khan's court in Mongolia in a matter of weeks, not months or years. The yam wasn't just for military intelligence, though that was its primary function. It was used by imperial envoys, by merchants carrying official business, and even by important foreign visitors like Marco Polo, who was astonished by its efficiency. The system effectively shrank the Mongol Empire. A general on the plains of Hungary could receive new orders from Karakorum. In a fraction of the time, his European counterparts could even receive news from their own capital city, a few hundred miles away. It gave the Mongols an incredible strategic advantage. They could coordinate the movements of multiple armies across thousands of miles. They could respond to threats with blinding speed. It was the nervous system of the empire, connecting its farthest limbs to the central brain of the Khan and his *Keshig*. And like everything else Genghis Khan created, the yam was enforced with brutal simplicity. The maintenance of the yam stations was the responsibility of the local populace, a form of tax paid in goods and services. To fail in this duty, to not have a fresh horse ready, to cause any delay to an imperial messenger, this was not a minor infraction. It was a crime against the state, and the punishments were severe. The system worked because it had to work. The cost of failure was unthinkable. What we see, when we put all these pieces together, the decimal system, the yasa, the *Keshig*, and the yam, is the work of a true nation-builder, a man who was far more than just a brilliant, bloodthirsty conqueror. The world he conquered saw him as a mindless destroyer, the scourge of God, and the destruction was very real, on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. But behind the wave of terror was a wave of organization. He was a systems thinker, a man who looked at the endemic, self-destructive chaos of his people and saw the potential for order. He took the individual warrior, the product of 1,000 years of harsh adaptation to the steppe, and made him part of a team. He took the scattered, feuding clans and gave them a single, unified identity. He took the unwritten, often contradictory customs of the nomads and forged them into a single, hard-edged legal code. He created a system for identifying and training leaders, ensuring his vision would outlive him, and he built an infrastructure that could tie a continent together with thundering hooves and leather pouches carrying imperial decrees. This was his ultimate weapon. It wasn't the composite bow, as devastating as that was. It wasn't the hardy steppe pony. It was organization. It was the weaponization of an entire culture. He took every single aspect of the Mongol way of life, their mobility, their resilience, their toughness, their horsemanship, and he disciplined it, focused it, and aimed it at the world. He didn't have to teach his people how to ride, or how to shoot a bow, or how to survive on a diet of mare's milk and dried meat. They already knew how to do that better than anyone else on Earth. He just had to teach them how to do it all together, at the same time, in the same direction. He gave them a purpose beyond mere survival. He gave them the world, and so, the final exam of the education that had begun in the cradle, that had been tested in the brutal ritual of the Great Hunt, and that had been formalized in the great institutions of the new Mongol nation, was about to be administered to the settled civilizations of the world, and they were not remotely prepared for the test.